The sun had dipped beneath the jagged ridges of the Alaska Range hours ago, but the last blood-tinted remnants of daylight clung to the peaks like old scars refusing to fade. The campground at Wolf's Jaw Valley was silent save for the groaning sighs of glaciers shifting deep in the earth. Most tourists never stayed here after mid-September, but 4 friends had decided they wanted isolation and challenge rather than guided trails and hot showers. Carla trudged from the van to their fire pit with a folding chair in each hand, breath misting in quick bursts of irritation. "I told you all, we're gonna freeze our tits off. You wanna see auroras? We could have done it from Denali Park with heating pads and rangers on call." Jake ignored her as he pitched the last corner of the large dome tent. He was the kind who needed to prove himself, Navy dropout turned oil rig welder, beard thick enough to make his jaw look square. "It's gonna be fine," he muttered. "You wanted something real for your blog, didn't you? Wilderness. Northern wild. Wolves and ghosts." "Don't joke," said Maya, their quietest member, pulling her parka hood tighter. She was pale and perpetually nervous, eyes flicking to the shadows in the tree line where black spruce loomed like skeletal sentinels. "You know the Tlingit stories about glacier spirits, right? If the ice cracks too early in the season, it means they're waking up angry." Ben snorted from the van where he sat loading his father's old hunting rifle. "Relax, Disney princess. Worst thing out here is a grizzly, and I got something for that." Carla watched him, lips curling. "Why did you even bring that? The rangers said not to." He racked the bolt with theatrical force. "Because the rangers aren't the ones sleeping out here if something comes sniffing around." No one spoke after that. Jake finished the tent and Maya unrolled sleeping bags lined with synthetic fur. Carla lit the propane stove to make ramen, her hands trembling from the cold. Above them the sky was a graveyard of dying blue, each star stabbing through like a shard of ice. By 9 p.m., the temperature had fallen to -15. They ate inside the tent, layered in thermal base clothing, listening to the wind claw across the glacier beyond their camp. Every so often a distant thunderous crack would echo through the valley. Maya flinched at each one, her wide eyes glistening with unspoken dread. "What is that?" Carla asked as another crack vibrated through her chest cavity. It was not thunder, not distant avalanche, it was something deeper, primal, like the land itself was splitting apart. Jake wiped chili from his beard and shrugged. "Glacier calving, probably. Or ice shifting under pressure." But Maya whispered, barely audible, "Or they're moving under there." Jake laughed, then seeing her face, sighed. "Who's they, May?" "The hungry. My grandfather told me stories. They're trapped under the glaciers. The oldest spirits. They eat what the wolves leave behind." Ben clapped his hands once, startling them. "All right, bedtime, kiddies. Tomorrow we hike out to Black Glacier Lake. No ghost stories tonight." They cleaned up in silence, each lost in private thoughts. As Ben zipped up the tent's outer shell, Carla noticed the forest was utterly silent. Even the distant owl calls and snowshoe hares rustling beneath trees had stopped. That night, Carla couldn't sleep. Her sleeping bag was warm but her toes burned with phantom cold. The cracking of the glacier continued, at times so near it seemed the ice was cleaving right through the bedrock beneath her. Then, just before sleep finally smothered her, she heard it, not a crack, but a long, groaning moan echoing from the valley. Like something deep beneath the ice was crying out. The sound froze her blood. Her heart thumped in her throat. "Jake," she whispered, but he was snoring softly beside her. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the spruce. Carla squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to think of cities and traffic and electric lights. Anything but the darkness pressing down upon their thin tent walls. She must have dozed off because she awoke to Maya screaming. Carla sat bolt upright. The tent glowed faintly blue with dawn light filtered through snow. Maya was clawing at Jake's sleeping bag, sobbing. "It took him," she cried. "It took him. It took him from under the ice." Jake sat up, groggy. "What the hell, I'm right here." Maya's eyes were unfocused. Her face was slick with tears and mucus. "It pulled you down. There was a crack, and black water, and hands, and they pulled you down under the ice." Ben rolled over, glaring. "Jesus Christ, Maya, it was a dream." But as Carla's eyes adjusted, she saw something that made her chest seize. On Maya's sleeping bag was a wide dark smear. Not blood. Not mud. Black ice slush, glittering with frozen crystals. And it smelled, sharp and coppery, like old coins left to rust in seawater. Jake stared at it, then out the tent flap towards the glacier valley. The sun was barely rising, but a thin mist drifted between the trees and over the open ice field beyond. He frowned. Maybe it blew in. There was wind all night. But Carla shook her head. "That's not melted snow. That's from something under the ice." No one spoke. Outside, the cracking resumed, echoing through the bones of the valley, louder than before. Like something waking up. Something moving closer. Morning crept into the valley with weak gray light that barely penetrated the thick clouds rolling overhead. Carla emerged from the tent first, steam curling from her mouth as she exhaled. Her boots crunched over frost-coated gravel as she scanned their surroundings. The campground was silent, unnatural in its stillness. Even the ice seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, the glacier lay under a film of mist, its surface cracked with jagged black scars. Jake and Ben climbed out soon after, stretching stiff muscles, stamping feet against cold. Maya remained in the tent, curled in her sleeping bag with her knees pulled tight to her chest, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red and raw from crying. "We're still going to Black Glacier Lake, right?" Ben asked, strapping on his daypack and slinging the rifle over his shoulder. His voice was steady, but his fingers drummed rapidly against the gunstock. Jake hesitated, glancing at the tent where Maya lay trembling. "Maybe we should head back. She's not okay." Ben's jaw tightened. "We came all the way out here. It's just a nightmare. She'll be fine." But Carla shook her head. "No. She's seeing something. Or feeling something. This place, it's wrong." "Don't start with the horror podcast shit, Carla," Ben snapped, but his eyes flickered to the glacier. "Let's just check out the lake and come back. It's a mile out. We'll be back before noon." Jake agreed reluctantly. He knelt inside the tent to touch Maya's shoulder. "We'll be back soon. Just sleep." She didn't answer. Her teeth chattered even though the sleeping bag was zipped to her chin. They set out across the gravel flats leading towards the glacier lake. As they walked, the silence pressed down on them like heavy snow. Their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, echoing off the ice walls on either side. Every so often, a dull crack split the valley, each one closer than before. Carla felt her chest tighten with each tremor beneath her boots. The ground here was frozen solid, but she could sense water moving deep below, like veins pumping cold blood through the land. After 20 minutes, they reached the edge of Black Glacier Lake. The water was hidden beneath a thin sheet of black ice, dark bubbles trapped within, frozen in place like drowning souls. The glacier towered above them at the far end, its face streaked with soot-black fractures where ice had collapsed in seasons past. Ben slung his rifle down and approached the lake's edge. "Looks solid enough," he said, stomping lightly on the ice. His boot sent a shivering crack radiating out beneath him. "Don't," Carla snapped. "This isn't funny." He looked at her over his shoulder. "What, you think there's something under there?" She said nothing, but her silence spoke enough. Jake turned away from them both, staring up at the glacier's face. Something felt wrong. The mist drifted across its surface like torn funeral veils, and behind it, he thought he saw movement. A shape. Tall. Thin. Watching. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Ben and Carla turned to look. The mist parted briefly. There, high up on the ice wall, stood a dark figure. Too far away to see its features. It didn't move. It simply stood, draped in black shadow, as if it had always been there. "What the fuck?" Ben muttered, raising his rifle. "Don't," Jake said sharply. "If it's a ranger, you'll go to prison." "That's no ranger," Carla whispered. Her voice trembled with something deeper than fear. Recognition. The figure stepped back into the mist and was gone. A long silence fell. The only sound was their breath and the occasional distant crack of shifting ice. "Let's go back," Jake said. His voice was flat, final. But before they could turn, another sound split the air. It came from the glacier itself, a long, low moan that rose in pitch until it echoed across the valley like a dying wail beneath the waves. Carla dropped to her knees, covering her ears. "Make it stop," she sobbed. Ben spun around, eyes wide with panic. "Where is it coming from?" The glacier groaned again, louder, deeper. And then, with a deafening crack, a fissure split the ice wall from top to bottom. A sheet of glacier the size of a building collapsed into the lake with an explosion of black water and pulverized ice. The wave crashed onto the shore, soaking their boots in freezing slurry. Carla screamed as the black water receded, revealing something beneath the ice where the glacier had fallen away. It was a hole. A massive, yawning crevasse, descending deep into the earth. Steam rose from its opening, carrying a stench so vile Carla gagged instantly, rotting fish mixed with sulfur and old blood. Ben stepped forward, his face twisted with horror. "What is that?" Inside the hole, barely visible in the darkness, something moved. Slow. Crawling. Like slick shadows writhing over each other. Then they heard it. The whispers. They came from the crevasse in dozens of voices, rasping in an alien tongue that bypassed the ears and drilled directly into the brain. Carla fell to her knees, clutching her head as the voices chanted, merging into a single thought, "We are awake." Jake grabbed Carla under her arms and dragged her back. Ben stood frozen, staring into the crevasse, tears streaming down his cheeks. His lips moved silently, repeating whatever words the whispers poured into him. "Ben!" Jake shouted. "Move!" But Ben only smiled. A thin trickle of blood dripped from his nose. He dropped his rifle, stepped forward onto the fragile edge of the crevasse, and let himself fall. Carla screamed as he vanished into the darkness. There was no sound of impact. Only the whispers growing louder. Jake didn't wait. He pulled Carla to her feet, and together they ran back towards camp, the glacier moaning behind them, the fissure widening with each tremor. The whispers followed them through the mist, curling around their bodies like invisible snakes, whispering promises of the void, of darkness, of something older than death waiting beneath the ice. They burst into camp to find Maya standing outside the tent. She was barefoot in the snow, eyes rolled back into her skull, her mouth open in a silent scream. When Carla reached her, Maya's eyes snapped forward, locking onto hers. In that moment, Carla saw everything, the truth behind the whispers, the shape in the mist, the things moving beneath the glacier since before the first people crossed the land bridge. "They're coming," Maya whispered. "They're coming for us all." And then the ice cracked again, louder than before, as if the entire valley was splitting in half. The glacier continued to groan behind them as Jake half-carried, half-dragged Carla back into camp. The tent flaps whipped in the rising wind, snapping like warning flags. Snow began to fall in fine needles, carried sideways by gusts that smelled of sulfur and something far worse, an earthy rot that coated the tongue with the taste of death. Maya stood motionless in her bare feet, staring into the valley where the fissure had opened. Her pupils were dilated so wide her irises were gone, swallowed in bottomless black. "Maya!" Carla shouted, clutching the girl's thin shoulders. "Maya, listen to me. We need to go. We need to go now." But Maya's lips only moved soundlessly. Tears streamed down her cheeks, freezing in the biting wind. Finally, her voice emerged in a hoarse croak, "They're waking up. The hungry. My grandfather was right. They told me their real name." Jake spun around, scanning the tree line, the glacier, the darkening sky. "We're leaving. Now. Grab your shit." He unzipped the tent with trembling hands, throwing sleeping bags, food packs, and propane canisters into a pile. Carla stumbled after him, her mind fogged by the whispers still echoing in her skull. The words had no meaning in English, only emotion, despair, hunger, worship. Outside, Maya fell to her knees in the snow, clutching her head. "They're coming. They're coming for us all. There's no road far enough away." Suddenly, a sound split the air. A sharp crack followed by a wet, gurgling howl. It came from the fissure. Carla turned to look. A thin, black shape was rising from the crevasse. At first, she thought it was smoke. Then she saw it was solid, long, eel-like, its flesh glistening with icy mucus. It had no eyes, only a circular mouth lined with ring after ring of serrated teeth. It rose 3 meters above the fissure edge, coiling and uncoiling like an eyeless serpent tasting the air. Steam poured from its mouth as it exhaled in ragged hisses. Beneath it, more shapes moved, slithering and undulating just beneath the ice surface, cracking it further with each shifting coil. Maya screamed. "Don't look at it. Don't look at it, don't look at it, don't look at it." But Jake couldn't tear his eyes away. "What the fuck is that?" he whispered. His voice sounded small, like a child's. The creature's head twisted towards them, mouth opening wider, revealing countless more rings of teeth receding endlessly into darkness. It emitted a deep, pulsing hum that made Carla's chest vibrate painfully. Blood trickled from her ears. Her nose felt hot and wet. The hum grew louder, becoming a resonance that bypassed sound entirely, shaking her bones, rattling her teeth, wringing tears from her eyes. Behind it, the fissure widened with a deafening crack. More shapes rose. Some were tall as trees, skeletal bodies wrapped in translucent flesh that stretched between jointed limbs like bat wings. Others were small, dog-sized, scuttling across the ice with pale, spidery legs and leech-like heads that pulsed and twitched. The serpent creature lunged forward, mouth closing around something beneath the ice, dragging it down with a spray of black slush. Carla realized, in sick horror, that it was feeding on the things trapped with it, devouring its own to grow stronger. Jake grabbed Maya by the arm and pulled her towards the van. "Move! Move!" But Maya resisted. Tears froze on her cheeks as she sobbed, "They won't let us leave. They're awake now." Jake slapped her across the face, leaving a red handprint on her pallid skin. "Move, Maya." She blinked, dazed, then stumbled after him. Carla ran to the van, fumbling the keys from her pocket. Her fingers felt numb, stiff, barely responsive. She managed to unlock it and threw open the door as Jake shoved Maya into the back seat. Carla jumped in behind the wheel, gasping with terror. The windshield was already fogging with their ragged breaths. The smell outside seeped in, sulfur, rotting fish, the metallic scent of old blood. Jake jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. "Go." Carla turned the key. The engine groaned once, twice, then fell silent. "Come on, come on, come on," she screamed, pounding the steering wheel. She turned the key again. Nothing. Only a clicking sound, like dry bones clacking together under the hood. Outside, the serpent creature uncoiled further, rising until its head was level with the treetops. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and all around it, the smaller creatures scuttled towards camp on their spindly limbs, moving with an unnatural, insectal grace. "They're coming," Maya whispered. She pressed her hands to the van window, tears streaking her dirt-stained cheeks. "They're coming for us." Jake grabbed the rifle from the back seat, chambering around with shaking hands. "If they get close, I shoot." Carla turned the key again. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief flooded her chest so quickly she almost sobbed. She slammed the van into reverse, tires skidding on frozen gravel as she backed away from the campsite. Outside, the black serpent lunged forward, mouth opening impossibly wide. Its teeth clamped down around a spruce tree, shattering it like dry twigs. The smaller creatures swarmed towards them, some moving with spider-like speed, others slithering across the snow leaving steaming black trails behind them. Carla slammed the van into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires spun before finally catching traction, propelling them down the frost-rutted road away from the glacier. Behind them, the serpent howled. The sound was a deep, pulsing wail that carried for miles, vibrating through ice and bone alike. As they careened down the road, Maya rocked back and forth in the back seat, whispering to herself, "They're coming for the warmth. They're coming for the warmth. They've been hungry for so long." Jake turned to Carla, his face pale and slick with sweat. "What the fuck are those things?" Carla shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I don't know. But they're not from here. Not from our world." Ahead, the road wound through black spruce forest, branches clawing at the van as they sped past. The sun was rising behind thick storm clouds, casting everything in a sickly gray light. Snow fell harder now, swirling in frantic gusts that threatened to blind them. Maya's whispers grew louder. "They came before us. Before the first hunters. Before the mammoths. Before the ice. They sleep under the glaciers until the warmth wakes them." Jake turned to look at her, his eyes wide with horror. "How do you know that?" She smiled faintly through her tears. "Because they told me." Outside, the forest ended abruptly, opening into a wide expanse of frozen marshland. In the distance, the road curved south towards the highway, and potential safety. But Carla's heart sank as she saw something moving between the distant trees ahead. Tall, skeletal shapes drifting across the marsh, arms dragging along the frozen ground, heads tilting back and forth as if sniffing the air. "They're everywhere," she whispered. Her voice cracked under the weight of hopelessness. "There's no way out." And behind them, the Black Glacier moaned again. The sound rippled through the earth like the dying breath of something ancient, something immortal. Something that had finally awoken from a 1,000-year hunger. The van tore across the frost-cracked gravel road, fishtailing dangerously as Carla swerved to avoid a fallen spruce. Snow pelted the windshield, and the wipers smeared white slush across the glass with each frantic pass. Maya whimpered softly in the back seat, rocking herself like a forgotten doll. Jake kept his eyes on the tree line, clutching the rifle with white-knuckled hands. "Don't slow down," he muttered. "Don't stop for anything." Ahead, the skeletal creatures moved between the trees with jerking, insectal grace. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fluid to be human. Some carried scraps of fur or frozen meat in their thin hands, gnawing as they walked. Others simply drifting across the snow without disturbing it, as if gravity held no meaning for them. Carla gripped the wheel tighter. Her arms ached with tension. "Where do I go? We can't drive past them." Jake's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Behind them, the serpent had slithered halfway across the glacier valley, its massive body dragging through snow and ice like an oil slick come to life. Smaller creatures flowed in its wake, dozens, maybe hundreds. "We can't go back," he said. "We need to find a place to hide. Regroup." Carla's vision blurred with tears. "There's nowhere to hide from that." Then Maya spoke, her voice low and distant. "There is." Jake turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" She didn't blink as she spoke. "My grandfather told me stories of the tunnels beneath the glaciers. Carved by meltwater over centuries. Places the spirits used to travel when the world was warmer." Jake shook his head. "That's insane. Those tunnels are death traps." But Maya only smiled, cold and small. "So is the surface." Ahead, the skeletal creatures clustered in the road, blocking their path. Carla's breath hitched as she slammed on the brakes. The van skidded sideways, tires screaming against the frozen gravel before coming to a stop just meters from the nearest creature. It turned towards them, its face a pale disk of bone with no eyes, only a vertical slit where a mouth might have been. It opened, revealing rows of needle-thin teeth that clattered together like chitinous mandibles. A rattling hiss escaped its throat, curling in the air like steam. Jake didn't hesitate. He rolled down the window, aimed, and fired. The rifle cracked. The creature's head snapped back, exploding into a fine mist of black fluid and shards of calcified tissue. Its body convulsed, twitching like a dying spider before collapsing to the ground. The other creatures turned in unison, staring at the van with faceless heads tilted. Then, with a deafening chorus of hissing rattles, they charged. "Drive!" Jake shouted. Carla spun the wheel, slamming her foot on the accelerator. The van jerked forward, smashing into two of the creatures. Their bodies crumpled under the impact, limbs snapping like dry branches. The van lurched over them with a sickening crunch before speeding onto a narrow side trail leading away from the main road. Branches clawed at the sides of the van as they barreled down the overgrown trail. Snow fell thicker now, blinding them to anything beyond a few meters. The world became a blur of gray and white and streaks of black trees whipping past. Finally, Maya pointed ahead. "There." Carla squinted through the snow. At the base of a sheer ice wall, partly hidden by fallen spruces, was a dark opening, a tunnel mouth gaping like a dead mouth in the glacier's face. Jake stared at it, then at Maya. That's real. She nodded. It leads beneath. Where they sleep. Where they remember. Carla felt bile rise in her throat. Why would we go there? Maya's eyes rolled up, tears streaming. Because it's the only place they won't look for us while they feed. Carla stopped the van in front of the tunnel. The engine ticked in the cold silence. Outside, the hiss of the creatures grew louder. Shapes moved through the snow behind them, silhouetted against the whiteout. The serpent's distant roar rumbled through the ground like approaching thunder. Jake opened his door. We go underground. Now. They grabbed what they could, the rifle, a lantern, their thermal blankets. Maya stumbled out barefoot, her feet blue with cold. Carla wrapped an extra scarf around her, but Maya barely seemed to feel it. The tunnel mouth yawned wide, lined with old ice streaked gray by trapped sediment. Its ceiling curved like a ribcage, narrowing to darkness 50 meters in. A stream of black water trickled from its depths, reeking of sulfur and rot. Jake turned on the lantern. Its flickering glow revealed ancient meltwater channels carved into the walls, smooth as glass. Carla shivered as she stepped inside. The air was thick with cold dampness that clung to her lungs like liquid nitrogen. Behind them, the creatures reached the van. The serpent's massive head loomed through the blowing snow, its mouth opening in a silent roar that vibrated the glacier around them. The smaller creatures swarmed over the van, tearing at the metal, shrieking in that chittering alien tongue. Carla turned away, following Jake deeper into the ice tunnel. The light dimmed behind them as they descended into the glacier's belly. Maya whispered under her breath with every step, chanting words that sounded older than language itself. After 20 minutes, the tunnel widened into a large cavern. The walls were lined with black ice embedded with ancient fossils, mammoth tusks, horse skulls, bones of forgotten beasts. But between them were shapes that weren't bones. Shapes that looked disturbingly human, yet wrong, too tall, too thin, with skulls that elongated backwards and teeth that filled their jaws like ivory needles. Jake swept the lantern across the cavern. Shadows leapt and danced across the walls. The ice floor cracked under their weight, revealing black water beneath that pulsed with each echo of the serpent's moans above. What is this place? Carla whispered. Maya sank to her knees. The Old One's graveyard. Where they sleep between hunts. Jake crouched beside her. Can they reach us here? She shook her head slowly. Not while they're feeding above. But when they finish, her voice trailed off as the tunnel behind them trembled. Far above, they heard the glacier splitting with a deafening crack. Ice dust fell like ash around them, glittering in the lantern light. Then they heard it. The moan. Closer now, vibrating the walls of the tunnel. A deep, resonant wail filled with hunger and grief and rage. The water beneath the ice rippled with each note, glowing faintly green in the darkness. Carla fell to her knees, clutching her head as the moan filled her skull, rattling her teeth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She felt it in her bones, her blood, her soul, a voice older than language screaming its hunger into the dark. Jake grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Stay with me. Stay with me. But the moan grew louder, becoming a chorus of voices rising from beneath the glacier. Maya curled into a ball, sobbing as blood dripped from her ears. She whispered over and over, "They're awake. They're awake. They remember us now." And from the water beneath the ice, something moved. A shadow larger than any whale, gliding silently under their feet, trailing tendrils of darkness behind it like funeral shrouds. It passed beneath them, turning slowly, revealing rows upon rows of blind white eyes staring up through the ice. Then it spoke, in a voice that bypassed air and flesh and spoke directly into their minds, "We remember you. We remember what you taste like." The ice cracked beneath their feet as the creature rose, shattering the floor with a roar that drowned out their screams. Carla felt herself plunging downward as the ice beneath shattered into jagged, swirling fragments. A scream ripped from her throat, raw and breathless, swallowed instantly by the cacophony of cracking ice and rushing black water. The freezing current seized her, driving knives of cold into her flesh, numbing her limbs as it dragged her deeper into the glacial underworld. She kicked desperately, but the icy water held her like liquid steel, relentless and merciless. Blind panic erupted in her chest, her lungs screaming for air as darkness closed in around her vision. Her heartbeat hammered frantically against her ribs, a wild drumbeat counting down to oblivion. Then something gripped her wrist, a human hand, firm and desperate. Jake's face appeared through the murky darkness, contorted with effort as he dragged her toward the surface. Carla's lungs burned like fire, the edges of consciousness fraying as they broke through into air. She gasped violently, choking on the foul stench that permeated the cavern. Jake held her close, pulling her onto a jagged shelf of black ice. Maya had scrambled ahead onto solid footing, sobbing and shivering uncontrollably. Behind them, the massive, eyeless creature sank slowly beneath the surface, its translucent tendrils unfurling as it drifted downward, vanishing into the depths of the subterranean lake. Carla lay coughing and retching, ice crystals forming in her soaked clothing. Jake pulled her into a sitting position, slapping her cheeks lightly. "Stay awake, Carla. Keep breathing." She shuddered violently, teeth chattering. What was that thing?" "Something old," Maya whispered, her voice echoing with strange reverence. "Older than ice. Older than humans." Jake lifted the lantern, illuminating the chamber around them. They were stranded on a narrow ledge that rimmed the water-filled cavern. The ice walls stretched upward into impenetrable darkness, riddled with ancient tunnels and branching fissures. Carla stared in horror at the countless openings, each a shadowed mouth leading deeper into the glacier's twisted veins. "What do we do now?" Carla asked weakly. "We can't go back up. And the way we came is gone." Jake swallowed, glancing upward, grim-faced. "Then we keep moving. These tunnels have to lead somewhere. If water carved them, they eventually reach open air." Maya shook her head slowly. "No. They don't lead out. They lead deeper. Downward. Where the glacier spirits sleep and dream." Jake turned sharply, frustration cracking his voice. "Maya, please, enough about spirits. We're trapped in ice tunnels underground. We have no time for stories." "They're not stories," she whispered. "Not anymore." The lantern flickered, its feeble glow struggling against the oppressive gloom. They had no choice. Staying meant freezing to death or facing whatever ancient horror lurked below. Moving meant surrendering to the tunnels, hoping desperately for salvation. Jake helped Carla stand, steadying her trembling legs. "We need to go now." She nodded numbly, her wet hair frozen stiff against her scalp. Maya drifted behind them, murmuring softly under her breath, a chant in words Carla couldn't understand but somehow feared deeply. They chose the widest tunnel, stepping gingerly along its slippery floor. Shadows danced along the ice walls, grotesque and distorted, their own shapes twisting into monstrous caricatures. Carla's pulse raced, each footstep crunching loudly, echoing through the winding passages. With every passing moment, the tunnel grew narrower, colder, darker. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened abruptly into another cavern, one even larger and infinitely more disturbing. Carla gasped, the sound choking in her throat. The cavern was filled with frozen forms suspended in walls of crystal-clear ice, preserved like grotesque museum specimens. Creatures she recognized from biology textbooks stood motionless, their expressions contorted in agony or terror: mammoths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, even massive prehistoric bears. Between them stood other creatures, ones Carla had never imagined, twisted, elongated humanoids with gaping mouths and pale, eyeless faces. Their long limbs bent at unnatural angles, fingers splayed, permanently grasping at empty air. Carla's heart thumped painfully in her chest. "What is this?" "A collection," Maya said quietly, eyes wide and filled with awe. "Their pantry." Jake shivered violently. "Let's just keep moving." But before they could cross the cavern, Carla froze, her eyes locked on a figure trapped deep within the ice wall. She stepped closer, heart hammering painfully. It was Ben. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly forward, his body rigid as though flash-frozen mid-stride. The expression of horror etched permanently on his face chilled Carla more than the cavern itself. "No," Carla whispered, hands trembling. "This can't, how did he get here?" Maya touched the ice gently, her expression filled with grief and resignation. "They take what they want. Preserve it. Save it until they're hungry enough." Jake turned away, face pale, jaw clenched in fury. "Keep moving." Carla forced herself to tear her gaze away from Ben's petrified body, bile rising in her throat. She staggered after Jake, wiping tears from her frozen cheeks. They crossed quickly, the shadows looming larger with each passing second, every sound echoing ominously. On the far side, the tunnel sloped steeply downward. Maya paused at the threshold, suddenly hesitant. "They're down there. Waiting." Jake turned to her, desperation edging his voice. "Then show us another way." She shook her head. "There is no other way." Carla felt hopelessness creep into her bones, chilling her deeper than the ice ever could. "Then we'll face whatever's down there. There's nothing else left." With each step downward, the cold intensified, wrapping around them like living coils, squeezing breath from their lungs. Soon the walls narrowed so tightly they had to move single file, scraping shoulders against jagged ice. The lantern sputtered weakly, its faint glow shrinking steadily. Then, from somewhere below, came a sound, a low, pulsating vibration, rhythmic and heavy. It resonated through Carla's bones, filling her chest with sickening dread. "They're here," Maya whispered. "The hungry." The tunnel opened suddenly into a cavern so vast it stretched beyond their lantern's dim reach. At the cavern's center rose a colossal pillar of black ice, pulsating softly with an eerie green glow. Countless shapes writhed inside the pillar, moving with agonizing slowness. Bodies trapped, shifting endlessly in torturous limbo. Carla stepped closer, hypnotized by the horrific spectacle. Faces pressed against the ice, mouths stretched open in eternal screams, hands clawing futilely at their prison walls. But as she watched, the pillar pulsed more violently, the ice cracking audibly. From deep within came a voice, not one, but countless voices speaking as one, echoing inside their minds with an overwhelming hunger: "You have awakened us fully. The warmth calls. We will feed again." Carla felt her mind slipping, the force of that voice unbearable. She collapsed to her knees, her vision tunneling as the cavern shook around her, the ancient ice splintering with thunderous cracks. Jake grabbed her shoulder, shouting something, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Maya fell beside her, eyes wide with terror and wonder. The pillar fractured, shards exploding outward. And as the ice shattered, unleashing the horrors trapped within, Carla knew with certainty that escape was impossible. They were deep within the labyrinth, utterly at the mercy of creatures who had waited eons for the glacier's melting, creatures whose hunger was eternal, merciless, and unstoppable. Carla lay sprawled on the cavern floor, frozen by terror as shards of black ice rained down around them, exploding into jagged fragments. The sound was deafening, like glass shattering endlessly, accompanied by that grotesque, pulsating rhythm deep in the glacier's heart. Jake staggered upright, gripping the rifle, eyes wide and desperate. "Get up. We need to move." Carla felt paralyzed, her limbs locked in shock, every nerve on fire. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to rise, heart racing so fast she felt faint. Maya crouched nearby, covering her ears, mouthing silent pleas to whatever spirits still listened. Shapes burst from the shattered ice, pale and writhing. Skeletal arms stretched impossibly long, thin bodies glistening wetly as if newly born. Mouths opened wide, screaming with voices that sliced through Carla's mind, overwhelming her with fear, grief, and hunger. Jake fired blindly into the swarm, rifle blasts echoing through the cavern. Bullets tore through translucent flesh, sending bursts of black fluid splattering the ice. Yet the creatures barely faltered, driven by a relentless, ancient hunger. "Go!" Jake screamed, pushing Carla toward a dark fissure along the cavern's far wall. Maya stumbled alongside them, sobbing hysterically, her feet leaving bloody footprints on the ice. They plunged into the narrow tunnel, shoulders scraping painfully against walls lined with jagged crystals. Behind them, the creatures surged, shrieking in a deafening chorus of rage and desperation. Carla ran blindly, her lungs aching with each breath, heart hammering. The tunnel twisted sharply, plunging deeper into oppressive darkness. Jake's lantern sputtered and dimmed, nearly extinguished, leaving them guided only by instinct and terror. Finally, after an eternity of stumbling, they emerged into another chamber, small, cramped, and filled with stagnant air so thick it felt suffocating. Carla collapsed against the wall, gasping painfully, her pulse roaring in her ears. Jake leaned against the opposite side, sweat freezing against his forehead. His eyes glinted wildly in the dim glow, haunted by exhaustion and despair. "We can't keep running," he rasped. "There's nowhere else to go." Maya slumped to the floor, curled into a trembling ball, sobbing quietly. Her whispered chants filled the chamber, echoing off the icy walls, a soft rhythm competing with the distant echoes of the pursuing creatures. Carla closed her eyes, shuddering. Her mind felt fractured, splintered by the horror they'd seen. "What are they, Maya? Why are they here?" Maya looked up slowly, her eyes sunken, skin stretched pale and translucent across her cheekbones. She spoke softly, as if confessing a forbidden secret. "They were always here. My grandfather said our ancestors knew them. They called them Kalapalik. The takers beneath the ice. When the ice melts enough, they wake. They feed." Jake laughed bitterly. "Kalapalik? Spirits from stories?" Maya shook her head slowly, despair in every word. "They aren't just stories. The ice trapped them for thousands of years, starving. Every cycle of thaw sets them free again. This time, they'll never go back to sleep. The glacier is breaking forever. They know it. They're hungry like they've never been before." Carla stared blankly, memories of Ben's frozen corpse clawing through her mind. "So there's no stopping them?" Maya's silence was answer enough. Suddenly, from behind them, came a soft, scraping sound. They turned sharply, hearts racing. At the far edge of the chamber, the wall rippled gently, the ice melting, then reforming. Carla stepped closer, trembling violently, watching in horror as a face slowly pushed outward from the wall, a pale, translucent visage with empty eye sockets and a mouth stretched wide in silent agony. She recoiled, screaming, but the face pressed forward, ice cracking loudly, until the entire figure emerged, a woman, impossibly thin, flesh pale as moonlight, hair trailing like strands of frozen silver. She raised a skeletal hand, pointing at Maya, lips curling into a grotesque smile. You have brought them to feed us. You heard our call. Maya shook violently, falling to her knees. No, please, I didn't, the figure laughed softly, cold and musical. You heard. You answered. Just as your grandfather did. Carla's pulse thundered painfully. What are you? The woman tilted her head gently, eyes glowing faintly with unnatural emerald light. We were here before ice, before humans. We watched your kind crawl across frozen seas, hunting beasts, burning fires. We waited in darkness, sleeping, dreaming of warmth, of blood. You awaken us each time you poison the sky and thaw our prison. Jake raised the rifle unsteadily, aiming directly at her chest. We're not your goddamn meals. She regarded him calmly, voice soft as snowfall. You're already food. We've tasted your fear. Your warmth. Your dreams. Behind her, more faces pushed from the walls, mouths silently screaming, eyes black and empty. The ice rippled, melting slowly, revealing passageways deeper into the heart of the glacier. Jake glanced desperately between them. We need another way out. The woman laughed quietly. All tunnels lead deeper. You've come too far. You've tasted our darkness. You belong to us now. Maya rose unsteadily, her eyes distant, unfocused. Let them go. Take me instead. Carla grabbed her arm. Maya, don't, but Maya gently pulled away, stepping toward the spectral figure. You need someone to stay, don't you? Someone to guide others here, to wake you when the warmth returns. The woman smiled softly, nodding. Your grandfather made the same promise. A guardian. A guide. A willing sacrifice. Maya, stop. Jake shouted, voice raw. But Maya only turned back, eyes shining with sorrowful clarity. It's already too late. Go, before they change their mind. The woman raised her arms, and the ice walls cracked loudly, revealing a narrow path upward, glistening faintly in distant sunlight. Jake grabbed Carla's hand, pulling her toward the tunnel, eyes wild. Come on. Carla hesitated, tears streaming. Maya smiled sadly, her face serene as she was enveloped by ghostly hands reaching from the walls, pulling her gently backward into the glacial depths. Her voice echoed softly after them. Tell them what happened. Warn them of what sleeps beneath the ice. Then she was gone, swallowed by darkness. Carla and Jake stumbled upward, hearts pounding, lungs burning, guided only by instinct toward the promise of daylight. They climbed desperately, the tunnel spiraling steeply until finally, after what felt like hours, a blinding white glow filled the passage. They burst through a narrow fissure onto a snowy hillside, falling to their knees, gasping in the painfully cold air. Behind them, the glacier groaned deeply, ice cracking ominously, tremors rippling outward. Carla collapsed, sobbing, staring at the distant sun, weak and pale above the jagged peaks. They'll come, she whispered. When the ice melts again. They'll always come. Jake stared at the glacier, eyes hollow, haunted. Then we'll have to warn the world. The wind picked up, carrying with it faint whispers, echoes of hunger, ancient and unstoppable, rippling from the darkness deep below the glacier, waiting patiently, dreaming eternally of warmth and blood. The bleak daylight burned Carla's eyes as they staggered across the snow-covered slope, leaving the glacier behind. The wind howled sharply, whipping her frozen hair around her face. Her body was numb, her thoughts shredded by exhaustion and grief. Jake trudged beside her, rifle dangling loosely in one hand, gaze vacant and fixed ahead. Neither spoke, the horror was too fresh, too raw. Maya's sacrifice echoed relentlessly in Carla's mind, each step away from the glacier filling her chest with unbearable guilt. The path downward was treacherous, winding along ice-crusted rock ridges that dropped sharply into shadowy valleys. Clouds churned violently above, thick and oppressive, their edges rimmed with a sickly greenish glow. Each gust of wind carried faint whispers, fragments of voices they'd heard beneath the ice, voices of hunger, waiting patiently, eternally. By the time they reached the base of the slope, darkness had begun to fall, smothering the Alaskan wilderness in shadowy hues. They had no shelter, no food, no warmth beyond their soaked clothing. But to stop would mean death or madness, or worse, becoming prey to the awakened horrors behind them. Carla finally broke the silence, her voice ragged and weak. "We need to find help. Warn someone." Jake nodded vaguely, his expression hollow. "Warn them of what, exactly? Spirits trapped in glaciers? Monsters beneath the ice? They're real," Carla snapped sharply. "You saw them. We both did." Jake stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "And who's going to believe it, Carla? Rangers? Police? They'll say we lost our minds up here." She swallowed hard, forcing down the wave of despair that rose in her throat. "We can't just ignore what we saw. They're waking up because the ice is melting. More people will die." Jake shook his head bitterly, eyes reflecting haunted disbelief. "What good does it do? Maya stayed behind, sacrificed herself, to buy us time. She knew nobody would listen. How do we even begin?" Carla stared at the snowy horizon, wind biting painfully at her cheeks. "We have to make them believe. People have disappeared out here before. If they know there's something real beneath the ice, maybe they'll stop coming. Maybe fewer will die." Jake's eyes softened slightly, anguish plain on his face. "Maybe." They walked in silence again, dragging heavy limbs toward what they hoped was the road, their feet crunching through snow now falling thickly. Hours stretched into endless darkness, stars obscured by shifting clouds. Carla's entire body ached, her mind numb and disoriented. Finally, a faint glow pierced the gloom, a light in the distance, warm and golden, shimmering through the blowing snow. Carla's pulse quickened. "There's something there. A cabin, maybe." Jake squinted ahead, hope flickering briefly in his exhausted face. "Let's move." They quickened their pace, trudging toward the distant glow. Gradually, the shadowy outline of a building emerged from the gloom, a ranger station, windows lit warmly, smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. Carla nearly sobbed in relief. They stumbled onto the porch, knocking desperately at the heavy wooden door. It swung open after a moment, revealing a middle-aged ranger with weathered features and concerned eyes. He stared at their shivering, soaked bodies with alarm. "Christ, come inside," he urged, guiding them into the warmth. "What happened out there?" Carla sank into a chair, limbs trembling violently. Jake collapsed beside her, eyes unfocused. We got trapped, Carla managed, teeth chattering. In the glacier. Our friends, gone. The ranger's expression darkened, his voice low and serious. Wolf's Jaw Valley. Carla nodded weakly. The ranger frowned deeply, his face clouded by quiet dread. You're not the first to come stumbling back from that valley. Few ever do. What exactly did you see? Jake glanced sharply at Carla, then back at the ranger, hesitating. Carla spoke instead, voice trembling but steady. Something living under the glacier. Things trapped beneath the ice, ancient things. Dangerous. The ranger stiffened, face turning pale. You saw them. Jake leaned forward sharply. You know. The ranger nodded gravely. I've lived here all my life. Stories passed down through generations. My family has watched people vanish into that valley for decades. Most assume wolves, bears, weather. But the locals know better. We tried to warn tourists, tried to warn authorities. Nobody listens. Carla's pulse quickened, desperate hope rising. Then you can help us. We have to tell people what's really there. He shook his head bitterly. I tried. 20 years ago, lost my brother to them. Tried to tell the world. Lost my job, my credibility, nearly my sanity. They called me a fool, a drunk, crazy. Eventually, I stopped speaking. Jake's jaw clenched. But you believe us. The ranger leaned close, voice low and filled with urgency. I don't just believe you, I know exactly what you're talking about. They wake when the ice melts, every time worse than before. More disappearances, more screams in the night. And they're stronger now. The thaw is worse every year. People will never listen until it's too late. Carla leaned forward urgently, eyes pleading. Then we have to show them. Prove it. The ranger studied her carefully, finally nodding slowly. There might be a way. Dangerous, but possible. Jake narrowed his eyes suspiciously. What way? The ranger hesitated, then moved quickly to a locked cabinet near the fireplace. Opening it, he withdrew an old, weathered journal bound in cracked leather. He set it gently on the table. My brother's notes. Before he vanished, he mapped the ice tunnels beneath the glacier. He believed he found their origin, the heart of the glacier. If someone reached it, documented it, showed proof, maybe the world would listen. Carla's heart raced. But it's suicide. The ranger nodded grimly. Probably. But if nothing's done, they'll come again. More will vanish. Eventually, they won't be satisfied with isolated tourists and rangers. They'll move into towns, cities. They hunger endlessly. Jake exhaled sharply, eyes closed tightly. We just escaped. Carla's voice broke softly, the weight of guilt and fear heavy. But Maya stayed behind to protect us. If we do nothing, her sacrifice meant nothing. Jake's expression hardened with resolve, finally nodding sharply. Then we go back. We finish it. The ranger smiled sadly. Then I'll guide you to the mouth of the tunnels. From there, you're on your own. Carla's pulse thundered painfully, terror clawing at her insides. Yet beneath that fear burned a fierce determination. She'd faced the creatures beneath the glacier, felt their hunger, tasted their ancient hatred. If returning was the only way to stop them, to honor Maya, to save others, then there was no other choice. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, rattling windows, whispering dark promises of horror yet to come. Carla stared at the fire, flames flickering like desperate spirits trapped and screaming silently. Soon they'd plunge back into the darkness, willingly facing horrors that should never have awakened. The glacier waited patiently, eternally hungry, eternally watching. It remembered them. It wanted them back. But Carla would return, not as prey, but as a witness. A warning to the world. They could no longer afford disbelief. The ranger's old truck rumbled along the frost-rutted road, its headlights cutting pale cones through the swirling pre-dawn darkness. Carla sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her reflection pale and gaunt in the vibrating glass. Every mile they drew closer to Wolf's Jaw Valley felt like another chain tightening around her chest. Jake sat beside the ranger in the front, rifle cradled in his lap, his face locked in grim silence. The ranger, whose name they'd learned was Thomas, drove with steady, deliberate focus, his eyes scanning the tree line with haunted wariness. They passed the turnoff where their van still sat abandoned, half buried in drifting snow. Dark shapes moved around it, pale, thin forms drifting like wraiths through the darkness, too far to see clearly yet close enough for their cold presence to seep through the windows. Carla shivered violently, clutching her backpack tight against her chest. Inside was the ranger's leather-bound journal, its pages crackling with age. She'd read fragments during the night, sketches of twisted humanoid creatures with eyeless faces, diagrams of tunnels spiraling down into darkness, hurried notes scrawled in shaking hand. The heart is alive. It dreams. We are nothing but warmth to it. The truck climbed the winding pass into the valley, tires crunching over old snow layered with fresh drifts. The glacier loomed ahead, vast and black under the faint pre-dawn light. Steam rose from fissures along its surface, curling into the frozen air like the breath of a sleeping beast. Thomas pulled the truck off the road near a collapsed ranger station, its roof caved under winter's relentless weight. He killed the engine, silence rushing in like a sudden scream cut short. He turned to face them. This is as far as I go. Jake frowned, shifting uncomfortably. You're not coming with us. Thomas shook his head, sadness shadowing his weathered face. I've already given too much to this glacier. Lost my brother, lost my sanity for a while. If I go back down there, I won't return. Carla swallowed the hard knot rising in her throat. How do we find the heart? Thomas gestured to the journal. Follow his maps. He marked the fissures that dropped directly to the lower tunnels. But, there's something you need to understand. He leaned forward, eyes burning with quiet urgency. Whatever is down there isn't just physical. It's old. Older than your mind can process. It wants warmth, yes, but it also wants to be known. If you look at it too long, it will root itself inside you. It will grow there. Jake's jaw clenched. We don't have a choice. Thomas sighed deeply, then reached into his coat and withdrew a small tin flask, pressing it into Jake's hand. Pure Everclear. If it gets you, don't let it take you alive. Carla felt her chest seize painfully, cold dread crawling up her spine. She nodded faintly, words beyond her. Thomas opened his door and stepped out, boots crunching on the frozen ground. He looked back at them once, eyes filled with pity, then turned and walked back down the road toward his truck, disappearing into the swirling gray dawn. Jake inhaled shakily, shoving the flask into his pocket. He turned to Carla, voice flat but resolute. Ready? She shook, but nodded. Let's finish this. They gathered their packs, lanterns, spare batteries, and the journal, then stepped out into the freezing air. The wind clawed at their exposed faces, sharp and needle-like. The glacier rose before them, streaked with black fissures that steamed faintly in the dawn chill. They moved cautiously across the gravel flats toward a wide fissure marked on the journal map. Their footsteps crunched loudly in the oppressive silence, echoing off the ice walls towering above them. At the fissure's edge, Carla peered down into darkness so absolute it seemed solid. She shivered violently, bile rising in her throat. The journal described it as the mouth of hunger. Jake clipped a rope to his harness and anchored it to a nearby boulder. He glanced back at her. "I'll go first. If it's clear, I'll signal." Carla nodded numbly, gripping her lantern handle so tightly her knuckles burned white. She watched as Jake descended slowly into the abyss, his boots scraping against the ice walls, breath fogging around his head like a ghostly aura. Minutes crawled by, each second pounding against her temples like a hammer. Finally, his muffled voice drifted up from below. "It's clear. Come down." She hooked herself into the rope, her fingers clumsy with cold, then swung her legs over the fissure's edge. The harness bit painfully into her hips as she lowered herself slowly into the shaft. The cold deepened with each meter, sinking bone deep, filling her chest with heavy, suffocating dread. When her boots finally touched solid ice, she unclipped and looked around. Jake stood a few paces away, lantern held high, illuminating a tunnel mouth yawning open into darkness ahead. "This way," he whispered. They moved cautiously into the tunnel, following the journal's diagram by flickering lantern light. The passage twisted and sloped downward, the walls lined with rippling ice striated black with trapped earth and bone fragments. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel opened abruptly into a cavern vast beyond imagining. Carla gasped despite herself. The chamber's ceiling rose hundreds of feet above them, lost in darkness. Pillars of ice towered like cathedral columns, glowing faintly with the same sickly green luminescence they'd seen before. Between them coiled immense shapes, half frozen, half living, their translucent flesh rippling with sluggish movements. Eyeless heads turned slowly toward the light as they entered, mouths opening to reveal endless rings of teeth. Carla clutched Jake's arm, trembling violently. "God, what is this place?" "The heart," he whispered hoarsely. "We found it." At the chamber's far end rose a massive pillar of black ice, pulsing with that dim green glow. Inside it twisted countless shapes. Some human, some alien, all writhing slowly in silent torment. Carla felt tears stream down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly. Her mind struggled to comprehend what she saw, consciousness cracking beneath the immensity of horror before her. The glacier wasn't just ice, it was a living graveyard, a prison, a nest. Then a deep, resonant vibration filled the chamber, vibrating the ice under their feet. The pillar pulsed brighter, illuminating the frozen forms trapped within. And from it came a voice, vast, echoing, layered with countless overlapping tones. It bypassed her ears, drilling directly into her mind. "You came back. You brought us your warmth. You brought us your dreams." Carla fell to her knees, clutching her head as agony ripped through her skull. Visions flooded her mind, endless cold darkness beneath shifting ice, thousands of years spent sleeping, waiting, dreaming of blood and heat. Jake roared wordlessly, raising the rifle, but the voice only laughed softly, rippling through their bones. "Foolish warmth. You think to destroy what you cannot comprehend. You are ours. You always were." The creatures in the chamber began to stir, their massive bodies uncoiling, mouths opening in silent screams. Carla felt her sanity splinter, terror devouring the last remnants of rational thought. Jake turned to her, eyes wild with despair. "The flask. Give me the flask." She fumbled in her pocket, hands numb, and pressed it into his shaking grip. He unscrewed the cap, soaking a rag in the clear liquid, then shoved it into the rifle barrel. "What are you doing?" Carla sobbed. He met her gaze, tears streaming down his cheeks. "If we can't kill it, maybe we can bury it. Run when I shoot." "No," she cried. "No, Jake, please," but he only smiled sadly. "Tell them. Warn them. Don't let Maya's sacrifice mean nothing." Then he turned and fired. The impact ignited the rag with a blinding flash, flames exploding outward in a violent roar. The ice pillar cracked with a thunderous boom, fissures racing through its surface like lightning. Carla screamed as Jake was consumed by the blast, his body vanishing into shards of flaming ice and boiling steam. The creatures howled in deafening rage, their eyeless faces contorted with fury. She ran. Blindly. Desperately. Tears streaming, heart shattering with each step. Behind her, the cavern shook violently as the glacier began to collapse, roaring with the anger of something impossibly ancient and eternally hungry. She didn't stop. Didn't look back. The whispers chased her up through the tunnels, promising eternal darkness, eternal hunger, eternal cold. And above, beyond the fissures, the rising dawn waited, indifferent and pale, to witness the awakening of things that were never meant to walk under the sun. Carla stumbled out of the fissure as the first rays of dawn broke over the jagged peaks, bleeding pale gold across the frozen valley. She collapsed onto her hands and knees, coughing violently, choking on steam rising from her frost-scorched lungs. Every nerve burned with cold. Her ears rang with a constant high scream, the echo of collapsing tunnels, Jake's sacrifice, and the whispers of the hungry overlapping into madness. The glacier behind her convulsed in violent shudders. Massive cracks raced up its surface, splitting apart millennia of compressed ice. Black slush erupted from fissures, bubbling and steaming in the sub-zero air. Shapes writhed within the slurry, thin, pale limbs reaching upward, clawing at the dim light as if it burned them. Carla forced herself upright, legs trembling under her weight. She stumbled across the snowfield away from the glacier, driven by pure instinct to flee. The world blurred around her, her vision rimmed with frozen tears. Jake. His name repeated endlessly in her mind, each syllable a blade scraping against her skull. She crested a low ridge and fell to her knees again as the full panorama of Wolf's Jaw Valley spread before her. Dozens of fissures had opened across the ice. Black steam rose from each, curling into the sky like funereal incense. Shapes crawled out slowly, some insectal, their legs skittering delicately across the snow. Others dragging themselves like eyeless, limbless serpents leaving black trails in their wake. The largest towered over the fissures on elongated limbs, their skeletal bodies wrapped in pale translucent flesh that shimmered sickly under the dawn. The moaning rose in volume, vibrating through the valley floor and rattling Carla's teeth. It merged with countless whispering voices carried on the wind, promising warmth, promising hunger, promising forever. Carla pressed her hands to her ears, sobbing hysterically. No, please, no. Maya. Jake, we failed. She forced herself to stand, staggering away from the glacier towards the ranger road. Her boots slipped on blood-slicked ice left behind by creatures dragging prey into fissures. She saw a snowshoe hare frozen upright in the drift, half its flesh dissolved by something black and glistening. She gagged, bile burning her throat. When she finally reached the gravel road, she collapsed against a frost-crusted guardrail. Her breath tore from her lungs in ragged gasps. The ranger's truck was gone. Thomas had left them behind, or perhaps he was dead somewhere beneath the ice. Carla forced her shaking hands into her parka pockets and pulled out the journal. Its pages were soaked through with melted snow and blood, but the final entry remained legible, scrawled in a desperate, slanted script. The heart is not bound to the glacier alone. It is the glacier. It is the cold. It is the dark. If it wakes fully, the ice will not hold it anymore. It will walk the world again as it did before there was life. She let the journal fall to the snow, staring blankly at the rising sun. The warmth felt wrong against her frozen skin, a promise she could no longer trust. The wind carried faint screams from the valley behind her, human screams swallowed quickly by the chittering and moaning chorus of the hungry. Carla forced herself to stand, legs shaking violently. She turned down the road, trudging south, away from the glacier. Every step burned with exhaustion, her body screaming to collapse. But she couldn't stop. Warn them, Jake's voice whispered in her mind. Don't let Maya's sacrifice mean nothing. The world blurred around her, dreamlike and surreal. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, glowing weakly through a thin veil of clouds. She stumbled onto the main highway by mid-morning, nearly collapsing as an old Subaru screeched to a halt beside her. A woman in her 50s jumped out, bundled in a thick red parka. Her eyes widened with horror at Carla's torn, blood-crusted clothing and glassy, vacant stare. Jesus, honey, what happened? Sit down, I'll call for help. Carla grabbed her wrist with frozen fingers, gripping painfully tight. Her voice cracked and rasped from dehydration and screaming. Don't go near the glacier. Don't let anyone go there. They're awake now. They're awake. The woman frowned in confusion and fear. Who's awake? You're freezing to death, honey, we need to get you warm. Carla's vision faded in and out as she clutched the woman tighter. They're coming. They're coming for everyone. Don't you hear them? The moaning filled her mind again, vibrating through her skull. She screamed, curling into a ball on the icy pavement. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the woman fumbling with her phone, her mouth moving frantically, her eyes wide with pity and terror. Carla woke in a small hospital room 2 days later, hooked to N4, the rhythmic beep of monitors echoing in the sterile quiet. Outside the frosted window, a gentle snowfall drifted down, soft and silent. For a moment she thought it had all been a nightmare. Jake's sacrifice, Maya's death, the glacier splitting open like rotten bone. Then she heard it again, the faint moaning beneath the earth. It resonated through her spine, familiar and endless. A nurse entered quietly, smiling gently. You're awake. How are you feeling today? Carla stared at her with hollow eyes. Where am I? Talk medical clinic. You were found on the highway. Severe frostbite, dehydration, hypothermia. You're lucky to be alive. Carla's eyes filled with tears. No. No one is lucky anymore. The nurse frowned slightly. Excuse me. Carla turned her head to the window, staring at the distant mountains, at the black shape crawling slowly down the glacier face, visible only as a faint smudge against the snow. They're coming, she whispered. And warmth is what they want most. The nurse left quietly, concern shadowing her face. Outside the clinic, the town bustled quietly under gray skies. Children played in snowdrifts, mothers scraped ice from car windshields, shop owners swept salted slush from storefront steps. None of them noticed the thin veil of black steam drifting down the valley. None heard the faint, mournful moaning carried on the frigid wind. But soon they would. Soon, everyone would hear it. Because the glacier was awake now. And it was hungry. The hospital lights were dim in the early hours before dawn. Carla lay awake, staring at the ceiling tiles as the monitor beeped steadily beside her. Her mind felt ragged, her body weak and trembling under the thin blankets. Despite the ford drip warming her veins, she couldn't stop shivering. Outside, the wind howled through the dark streets of Talk, rattling the clinic's windows. Each gust carried faint echoes of that moaning chorus she could never unhear. She pressed her hands against her ears, but the sound was inside her now, woven into her bones and blood. The door opened with a soft click. A man stepped in, his heavy boots muffled against the tile. He wore an Alaska State Trooper's uniform, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He carried a clipboard under one arm and a thermos of coffee in the other. His eyes were sharp and lined with sleepless fatigue. "Carla Monroe?" he asked, his voice clipped but not unkind. She turned her head to him, unable to muster words. Her throat burned with dehydration despite the fluids dripping into her veins. He pulled up a chair, settling heavily into it. His badge read Lieutenant Glenn Sorrow. He opened the clipboard, scanning the notes silently for a long moment. Then he looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers without flinching. "I'm sorry to do this while you're still recovering. But we have questions. You were found alone on the Talk cutoff. No ID, hypothermic, severe exposure injuries. You kept repeating something about people waking up beneath the glacier. You said you saw creatures. That your friends are dead." Carla stared at him with hollow eyes. "They're not dead," she whispered hoarsely. "They're eaten. They're taken." He frowned deeply, clicking his pen once. "Ms. Monroe, I need you to start from the beginning. Why were you out there?" She closed her eyes. Memories surged up like bile. Ben's body frozen in the ice, Maya's empty gaze, Jake's final scream drowned in fire and cracking glaciers. She swallowed hard, tears sliding from the corners of her eyes. It was supposed to be a camping trip. Jake wanted to see Black Glacier Lake. Ben brought a rifle. Maya kept saying we shouldn't go. She knew. Knew what? Carla opened her eyes, staring into his. That there are things under the ice. Older than humans. Older than the land. They're awake now. The glacier cracked open. They're coming out. The trooper sighed quietly, rubbing his temples with thick fingers. "Ma'am, do you understand how that sounds? You're dehydrated. Traumatized. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations." She shook her head violently. "No. It wasn't a hallucination. They're real. They're coming." He tapped his pen against the clipboard, his eyes weary. "What did you see?" Carla's voice cracked. "Serpents with mouths like lampreys. Eyeless skeletal things taller than trees. Smaller ones that skittered across the snow like spiders. They spoke, in my head. They told me they were hungry." The trooper wrote silently for a long moment. Then he looked at her, his expression unreadable. "We sent search teams up yesterday. The rangers reported strange fissures all across the glacier. Steam rising from the cracks. One of the teams hasn't reported back yet. Radio contact lost near Wolf's Jaw." Carla felt her chest seize with panic. "You have to pull them back. They'll die. You can't fight what's down there." But Lieutenant Sorrow only shook his head slowly. "We can't ignore missing personnel, Ms. Monroe." A knock at the door interrupted them. Another trooper stepped inside, his uniform dusted with frost, face pale and drawn. "Lieutenant. You need to hear this." Sorrow rose, gesturing for him to continue. The trooper swallowed hard. They found something in the trees along the cut-off. About 5 miles from here. What is it? Sorrow asked. A moose carcass. Or what was left of it. Stripped clean to the bone in places. Other parts, dissolved. Almost like acid burns. And what? The young trooper shivered. It was upside down. Hanging from a spruce branch 30 feet up. Like it was placed there. Sorrow stared at him, his jaw tightening. Get the Rangers. Tell them to pull back all units from Wolf's Jaw. No one goes near the glacier until we figure out what's happening. Carla pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's already too late, she thought. They're moving beyond the glacier now. Sorrow turned back to her, his eyes dark with dread. Ms. Monroe. I need you to tell me everything you saw down there. Everything. Don't leave anything out. Carla took a trembling breath. They're not just creatures. They're minds. They spoke to me. They're not animal or human. There's something in between. Something that remembers before there was warmth or light. Before us. And now that the ice is melting, they're free. Sorrow listened silently as she spoke, writing notes in cramped script. Outside, the wind rose to a shrieking howl, rattling the window panes. Carla flinched at the sound, her ears ringing with echoes of those ancient whispers. The young trooper who had delivered the report suddenly gasped, his hand pressed to his earpiece. Sir, dispatch is getting calls from Healy. People are reporting seeing things crossing the highway outside town. Tall, thin shapes. Moving fast. Sorrow turned to him sharply. Evacuate Healy. Alert Fairbanks State. Get fish and game out there with every weapon they can carry. The young trooper's face was gray with fear. Sir, some of the calls say they saw people they knew, walking with them. But, wrong. Carla's stomach heaved, bile rising into her mouth. They're taking people alive now, she realized. Changing them. Lieutenant Sorrow turned back to her, his voice ragged. Ms. Monroe. If you know how to stop them, you need to tell me. Now. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. There is no stopping them. They're older than us. Stronger than us. We're nothing to them. Sorrow's face tightened with grief and fury. Then we'll fight anyway. Carla closed her eyes, sobbing softly. We're already too late. Outside the clinic window, the morning sky had turned a sickly greenish gray. Faint shapes moved between the trees along the town's edge. Tall, thin, graceful in an inhuman way. Their eyeless heads tilted upward as if scenting the air. In the distance, the glacier moaned, the sound rolling across the land like the death knell of something far greater than human civilization. The hungry had awakened. And now, they were coming to feed. Outside the Talk Medical Clinic, chaos erupted as dawn clawed weakly across the gray sky. The streets filled with flashing patrol lights, the distant thrum of helicopters, and the trembling voices of rangers and troopers barking orders through radios that crackled with static and panic. Carla sat in her hospital bed, staring out the frosted window. Her breath fogged the glass in ragged bursts as she watched thin shadows moving between spruce trees at the edge of town. Tall shapes, gliding rather than walking, limbs too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Their eyeless faces turned this way and that, as if tasting the air for warmth. Lieutenant Sorrow burst back into her room, face slick with sweat despite the cold. His uniform was hastily rebut-toned, his badge clipped askew. Behind him, 2 troopers carried rifles with shaking hands, eyes darting to the window and back again. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice clipped with controlled terror. "We need to move you to a secure facility in Fairbanks. They've set up an emergency response team with the National Guard. You'll be safer there." Carla shook her head numbly, eyes fixed on the moving shapes outside. "There is no safe place now." He ignored her, gesturing to the troopers. "Get her dressed. Move fast." They helped her into thick fleece-lined pants, boots, and a parka too large for her frail frame. She felt weightless, hollow, like her body was only loosely tethered to her mind. As they guided her through the hallway, nurses and doctors pressed against the walls, whispering prayers and sobbing quietly into gloved hands. Outside, the cold bit savagely into her face. The troopers rushed her into a black SUV, slamming the doors shut as Lieutenant Sorrow climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and they sped down the snow-choked road, passing abandoned cars and people standing frozen in shock, staring into the forest. A child stood on the roadside, maybe 7 years old, bundled in a thick red coat. Carla pressed her face to the window, her heart seizing with sudden grief. The child's head tilted back, revealing an eyeless, gaping face stretched into a silent scream. Black steam rose from its open mouth, curling into the cold morning air. Carla screamed. One of the troopers in the back seat cursed violently, fumbling his rifle to his chest. "Don't stop," Sorrow barked, swerving around the figure. The SUV fishtailed violently before gripping again, spraying slush in a wave behind them. They drove north along the talk cut off, the mountains looming to their left, shrouded in swirling mist. As they passed a stretch of open marsh, Sorrow cursed under his breath. God Almighty! Dozens of thin figures walked slowly across the frozen swamp, heads bowed, arms dangling limply at their sides. Some dragged bodies behind them, leaving long crimson trails carved through the snow. Others moved alone, their skin pale and glistening like raw fish flesh, mouths opening and closing in silent chants. Carla pressed her hands to her temples, sobbing. The whispers filled her mind again, curling around her thoughts like icy serpents. "We smell your warmth. We hear your blood. You woke us. You belong to us." They drove for another hour through rising panic. Emergency vehicles screamed past them in both directions. A helicopter roared overhead, its spotlight sweeping the tree line, revealing dozens more figures moving just beyond the road's edge. Radio chatter filled the SUV, fragmented voices barking orders, screaming for backup, reporting entire ranger teams gone silent. Then came a broadcast that silenced everyone in the vehicle. "This is Eagle Summit Command. We have contact. Repeat, contact with multiple entities at the Denali Highway Junction. They're moving into the town perimeter. Civilians down." Civilians down, the radio crackled with static and a distant shrieking roar that froze Carla's blood. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too resonant, vibrating through the vehicle's frame. Then silence. Lieutenant Sorrow's hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel that his knuckles blanched. He spoke softly, his voice breaking. "God help us." Ahead, the road curved sharply along a narrow pass. As they turned the bend, a National Guard roadblock came into view. Humvees and armored trucks lined the highway, soldiers crouched behind sandbag barricades, weapons trained on the tree line. The SUV skidded to a stop, and Sorrow jumped out, flashing his badge and waving Carla forward. "Come on," he shouted, grabbing her arm. Soldiers shouted back and forth, their breath fogging around black balaclavas. One pointed into the trees. There. Movement, 3 o'clock. Carla stumbled after Sorrow as he pulled her toward an armored command truck. Just as they reached it, an inhuman scream erupted from the forest, a chorus of shrieking, moaning voices overlapping into a sound so loud it rattled her teeth and bones. Shapes burst from the tree-line. Soldiers opened fire instantly, bullets cracking the frozen air. Muzzle flashes lit the shadows, illuminating the horrors charging toward them. Thin bodies skittered forward on too many limbs, mouths yawning wide, revealing rows upon rows of glistening needle teeth. Some moved upright, eyeless heads thrown back as they howled. Others crawled on their bellies, their pale skin rippling like translucent jellyfish flesh. A soldier screamed as one of the smaller creatures pounced, latching onto his neck with its lamprey-like mouth. Black fluid gushed from the wound as the creature pulsed and throbbed, sucking him dry within seconds. Lieutenant Sorrow shoved Carla against the Humvee's armored flank. "Stay here." He raised his rifle, firing into the charging creatures. Their black blood sprayed across the snow, steaming where it landed. But more kept coming, their whispering voices merging into a single overwhelming command: feed. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the battlefield. Carla looked up in horror as a massive form emerged from the trees. It was one of the serpent creatures she'd seen beneath the glacier, its eyeless head rising 30 feet into the air, mouth lined with concentric rings of serrated bone. It moved with horrifying grace, coiling across the frozen ground as soldiers scattered before it. A helicopter roared overhead, strafing the serpent with heavy machine gun fire. The bullets punched through its translucent flesh, spraying black ichor in gouts, but the creature only shuddered and lunged upward, jaws closing around the chopper's tail. Metal shrieked as the helicopter spun out of control, slamming into the tree line in a burst of flame and shattered rotor blades. Carla screamed, pressing her hands over her ears. The whispers flooded her mind so intensely she felt her sanity fracturing. "You cannot escape. You are warmth. You are life. We will drink you all." Sorrow grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her violently. "Carla! Carla! How do we stop them?" She sobbed brokenly, tears freezing instantly against her cheeks. "You can't, you can't, you can't," the serpent reared above them, mouth opening impossibly wide. Its scream was a living sound, vibrating through the ground, the Humvee, her flesh, her soul. Soldiers fled in blind panic as it lunged downward. At that moment, a massive explosion erupted from behind them. Fire roared up into the dawn sky as an armored fuel tanker detonated, the shockwave knocking Carla to the ground. She lay in the snow, gasping for air, ears ringing. When she rolled over, the serpent lay writhing in the burning wreckage, its body sheared nearly in half. Its mouth opened and closed silently, black ichor spilling across the snow in steaming rivers. Sorrow limped toward her, his face bloodied, one arm hanging limp at his side. "We need to move, now." Carla stared numbly at the burning serpent, the smoking battlefield strewn with torn bodies and blackened snow. The wind shifted, carrying the familiar, suffocating moan across the pass. She knew then, this was only the beginning. The glacier was broken. Its children were free. And the warmth of humanity called to them across every mountain, every valley, every trembling town. She let sorrow pull her upright. Together they stumbled away from the smoldering battlefield as dawn broke fully over the Alaskan range, revealing dozens more shadows moving in the forests beyond. They had awakened. And the world had just become their hunting ground. The fires still burned across the Denali Pass as helicopters circled overhead, their spotlight sweeping over smoking wreckage and torn snowfields streaked black with frozen ichor. Carla sat against a ruined barricade, wrapped in a thermal blanket that did nothing to stop the tremors racking her body. Lieutenant Sorrow crouched nearby, cradling his injured arm against his chest. His face was streaked with soot and blood, eyes bloodshot from smoke and tears. Around them, National Guard medics moved with frantic precision, dragging wounded soldiers onto stretchers, covering silent bodies with silver tarps that fluttered in the bitter wind. Carla stared into the forest beyond the barricade. Thin shapes still moved between the trees, pale shadows flickering in and out of view as if reality itself couldn't hold them steady. The wind carried their whispers, curling around her like a noose of cold breath. "We smell you. We hear you. We feel your warmth." A medic knelt beside her, shining a penlight into her eyes. "Miss? Can you hear me? We need to get you to the command post. Can you walk?" Carla didn't respond. Her gaze remained fixed on the tree-line where something massive slithered slowly between black spruce trunks, an immense serpent form, its mouth opening and closing silently, eyeless head swinging back and forth as it tasted the morning air. Sorrow pushed the medic aside gently. "Leave her. She's in shock." He leaned close, his voice hoarse and ragged. "Carla. Listen to me. Fairbanks is evacuating. Anchorage is on high alert. These things, they're spreading faster than anyone can respond." She blinked slowly, her eyes red-rimmed and glazed. "They were always here," she whispered. "Sleeping under the ice. Waiting for warmth." The medic returned with another soldier. "Sir, command needs you now. Anchorage is requesting direct reports. We just lost Healy and Nanana. Completely dark." Sorrow inhaled shakily, standing with visible effort. "Get her on a chopper to Fairbanks. If they're dark, it won't be long before." Suddenly, an explosion shook the valley, rippling up through their feet and rattling the smoldering barricades. Everyone froze, turning toward the glacier. From the fissures beyond the tree-line, pillars of black steam rose into the sky. Shadows poured out around them, thousands of small scuttling forms racing down the valley floor, flanked by towering skeletal shapes whose thin limbs stretched unnaturally long with each stride. Carla's stomach twisted painfully as she watched the advancing tide. They moved like liquid darkness, unstoppable and endless. She knew then that this was no localized breach. The hungry were not bound to Wolf's Jaw alone. They were everywhere the glaciers reached. Everywhere the permafrost cracked. Everywhere warmth had awakened what was meant to sleep forever. Helicopters roared overhead, banking south toward Fairbanks, rotor wash flattening scorched grass and whipping cinders into miniature tornadoes. A squadron of 8-10 Thunderbolts screamed in from the west, their cannons unleashing a torrent of explosive shells that tore massive chunks from the charging serpent forms. But it did nothing to slow the tide. The shadows kept coming, trampling their dead beneath their countless clawed limbs. As the first creatures reached the perimeter, gunfire erupted in deafening fury. Muzzle flashes lit the early morning darkness in staccato bursts, illuminating grotesque forms leaping onto barricades, tearing through sandbags and soldiers alike. Carla felt a warm hand grip her wrist. Sorrow pulled her up roughly, pain flickering through his injured features. "We're leaving. Now." They ran, weaving between armored trucks and burning wreckage. Soldiers screamed behind them, radio chatter dissolved into incoherent static filled with gunfire and ragged shrieks. Carla stumbled repeatedly, her boots slipping on blood-slicked snow, her vision dimming at the edges with each breath. They reached the command truck just as a serpent creature reared above it, mouth opening impossibly wide to reveal ring upon ring of bone teeth. Sorrow raised his sidearm, firing until the slide locked back, bullets punching uselessly into translucent flesh. The creature lunged. Its jaws closed around the truck, tearing it in half with a single snap. The impact threw Carla and Sorrow to the ground, her ears ringing from the concussive boom. She crawled to her feet, vision blurred with tears and smoke. The serpent turned toward her, its eyeless head tilting curiously. It opened its mouth, and from deep within came a voice. Countless overlapping whispers merging into a single command. We remember you. We remember your warmth. Join us. Carla screamed as black tendrils erupted from its throat, lashing toward her. At that moment, a missile streaked down from the sky, slamming into the creature's chest. The explosion tore it apart in a spray of steaming ichor and shattered ice. She collapsed, coughing violently as the acidic fumes burned her lungs. Strong arms lifted her upright. A medic dragged her away, pushing her toward an armored Humvee idling nearby. Move! Move! They're breaching the lines. She turned back, searching desperately. Sorrow. He was nowhere in sight. Only writhing shadows and burning wreckage remained where he had stood. The medic shoved her into the Humvee. The door slammed shut. The vehicle lurched forward, tearing down the icy road as gunfire crackled behind them. Carla pressed her forehead against the window, sobbing. They passed burning trucks, twisted bodies half buried in snow, creatures feasting on the fallen with slurping, insectal sounds. The farther they drove, the fewer soldiers they saw. Shadows moved along the tree line, keeping pace with them, flickering in and out of view like glitches in reality. The Humvee roared onto the main highway, skidding around wrecked sedans and abandoned snowplows. The radio crackled with desperate voices. Fairbanks command to all units, contact lost with Nanana. Contact lost with Healy. Anchorage reporting multiple breaches at Port Mackenzie. Repeat, Port Mackenzie breached. The medic in the passenger seat turned to Carla, his face pale with terror. What are they? Where did they come from? She shook her head slowly, tears burning her eyes. They came from before us. Before light. Before warmth. He stared at her, uncomprehending. They are the dark, she whispered. And now, they're awake. The Humvee roared south down the frost-choked highway as dawn rose weakly over the collapsing world. Behind them, the glacier moaned in triumph, a sound that rippled out across the mountain ranges, down through the boreal forests, across the rivers and coastal plains. A sound that promised only one thing, hunger. The Humvee barreled south along the frost-cracked highway, its diesel engine roaring as it skidded around abandoned vehicles and overturned snowplows. Carla pressed her face to the cold window, watching the forest blur past under the dim mid-morning light. Her vision felt unreal, as though she were trapped behind a pane of cracked glass, watching someone else's nightmare unfold. Beside her, the medic clutched his rifle tightly, eyes darting to the tree line where thin shapes moved with impossible speed, keeping pace with the fleeing convoy. Their bodies rippled like shadows, translucent in places, their eyeless heads twitching back and forth as if scenting the Humvee's engine heat through the icy wind. Every so often, the medic would whisper a prayer under his breath, his trembling fingers tracing the worn crucifix tucked into his Kevlar vest. Ahead, Anchorage's skyline rose through the murk, a jagged silhouette of glass and steel towers built against the endless expanse of gray sea. Helicopters circled the city, streaking low between high rises, their spotlights sweeping the frozen streets below. Faint plumes of smoke curled up from the coastal docks where tankers lay moored under heavy ice. The Humvee pulled off the highway at a military checkpoint. Concrete barricades lined the road, flanked by armored vehicles and lines of soldiers in white camouflage winter gear. Machine gun turrets swept back and forth over the tree-line, barrels steaming in the bitter wind. As Carla stepped out, blinking in the swirling snow, an officer approached, his face drawn and windburned under his frost-crusted helmet. He spoke to the medic first, voice clipped with exhaustion. "Where's the rest of your unit?" The medic shook his head slowly. "Gone. The valley's lost, sir. She's the only survivor." The officer's eyes flicked to Carla, narrowing slightly. "You're the civilian from talk." Carla nodded faintly, her lips cracking with cold. "They're coming. Faster than you think." The officer gestured to a nearby command tent. "Come with me." Inside, a portable heater blasted hot air against canvas walls lined with satellite images, maps, and live drone feeds. A cluster of generals and National Guard captains stood around a folding table, their faces drawn and gray under harsh fluorescent lamps. The air smelled of sweat, gun oil, and stale coffee. One general looked up sharply as Carla entered. "This is her." The officer nodded. "Carla Monroe. Survivor from Wolf's Jaw." The general turned to her, his voice heavy with urgency. "Tell me exactly what you saw up there." Carla trembled, swallowing bile as memories flooded her mind. Ben's frozen corpse trapped in the ice, Maya whispering her final prayers, Jake's body disappearing in a flash of flaming ethanol and shattering black ice. The whispers of the hungry roared in her skull, drowning out the hum of generators and the distant thump of helicopter blades. "They're not animals," she whispered hoarsely. "They're older than us. They slept under the glaciers before humans even existed. We were warmth to them. That's all. Just warmth." A colonel leaned forward, eyes bloodshot. "How do we kill them?" Carla shook her head slowly. "You don't. You can't." The general clenched his jaw, glaring at a satellite monitor showing live footage of the Kenai Peninsula. Dark shapes moved through the spruce forests, a roiling tide of shadows spreading outward from the glacier valleys. Thermal cameras showed their heat signatures as streaks of black, colder than the surrounding air, each one flickering with faint pulses like a dying heartbeat. "We're evacuating Anchorage," he said tightly. "But we don't have time to clear the entire city." Another officer spoke up, voice trembling. "Sir, reports coming in from Nome. Similar breaches. Black steam fissures. Shadows moving under the sea ice." The general slammed his fist onto the table, rattling coffee cups and pens. "Then it's not just here. It's the entire goddamn Arctic thaw line." Carla pressed her hands to her ears, her pulse roaring. The whispers intensified in her mind, drilling through her sanity. "We smell them. So many. So warm. The cities will be ours." Suddenly, an airman burst into the tent, his face flushed with panic. "Contact at perimeter. They're here." The general grabbed his sidearm and radio. "Get her on a transport chopper. Now." Carla stumbled as two soldiers grabbed her arms, dragging her back into the bitter cold. The sky had darkened despite the hour, heavy clouds rolling inland from the Gulf, casting the city into an eerie, perpetual twilight. Down the avenue, shapes emerged from the forest line, skeletal forms taller than lampposts, their limbs bending with unnatural grace as they stepped onto the frozen tarmac. Smaller creatures swarmed between them, skittering over snowbanks and abandoned cars with insectal precision. Machine guns opened fire in a deafening chorus, muzzle flashes illuminating the nightmarish tide. The large figures staggered as tracer rounds tore through their translucent bodies, spraying black ichor in steaming gouts. But they did not fall. They simply kept coming, shrieking in a cacophony of overlapping voices that rattled windows and cracked streetlights overhead. The soldiers dragged Carla through the chaos toward the evac pad. Helicopters idled on their skids, rotor blades thumping in frantic urgency. She stumbled up the ramp of a Chinook as medics hauled in wounded soldiers, some screaming in agony, others eerily silent with shock. As the helicopter lifted off, Carla pressed her face to the porthole window. Below, Anchorage burned. The creatures moved between buildings, their shadows flickering across broken glass and blazing storefronts. People ran screaming through the streets, gunfire rattling in short, hopeless bursts before silence fell again. And above it all, the glacier moaned. The sound carried across the frozen city, vibrating through steel and concrete, shaking snow from rooftops in choking veils. It was the sound of something awakening fully, stretching after an eternal sleep. The sound of a world falling into a darkness older than life itself. A medic crouched beside her, voice trembling. "Where do we go now?" Carla turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, freezing instantly in the backdraft from the open ramp. "There is nowhere to go," she whispered. "This is their world now." Below, the tide of the hungry washed through Anchorage's streets, leaving only silence in their wake. The Chinook thundered south across the Gulf of Alaska, its rotor blades beating the frigid air with desperate urgency. Carla sat strapped to the metal bench, her thermal blanket clutched around trembling shoulders. The whine of the engines vibrated through her bones, rattling her teeth with every turbulent shudder. Outside, the twilight deepened despite the mid-morning hour. Heavy clouds rolled across the sky, churning with bruised purples and sickly greens. Lightning flickered far out over the ocean, illuminating jagged coastal cliffs and endless black water below. Across from her sat a huddle of soldiers and medics, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. One young private stared unblinking at his blood-stained gloves, his lips moving silently in prayer. Another clutched a shattered rifle stock against his chest like a broken crucifix. Carla closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the vibrating fuselage wall. The whispers were louder now, woven into every gust of wind and turbine whine. They pulsed through her skull with each beat of her heart, warmth fleeing. "We smell it. We taste it. Nowhere left to hide." She felt tears slide down her cheeks, burning hot against her frost-numbed skin. There was nowhere left to run. They were awake now, fully, permanently, their hunger unbound from ice and shadow. Her mind flashed to Maya's final prayer in the tunnels, the words etched into her memory. "Let the old ones sleep. Let them dream alone. Let them never wake to remember us." But they remembered. And now the world trembled under their awakening. The pilot's voice crackled through the cabin speakers, tense and clipped, "Command to all units, Kodiak Base is receiving mass refugee inflow. Anchorage has fallen. Repeat, Anchorage has fallen. New orders are full civilian evacuation to western islands or deep inland Alaska. The coast is compromised." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the cabin. One medic buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. Another soldier cursed under his breath, his shaking fingers clawing at his rifle strap. Carla turned to the window as the helicopter banked along the coastline. Far below, the shattered outskirts of Anchorage smoldered under thick veils of drifting snow. The black shapes moved across the frozen ground like an oil spill come to life, silent, patient, endless. She felt someone grip her wrist. She turned to see Lieutenant Sorrow slumped beside her, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. A thick white bandage wrapped his shoulder where ragged stitches peeked through dried blood. "Carla," he rasped, his voice raw with exhaustion. "What are they going to do? Nuke the glaciers? Firebomb entire valleys?" Carla shook her head slowly, her hair crackling with frost. "It won't matter. The glaciers are just their prisons. They were here before the ice. They're everywhere the cold reaches. The melt just set them free." His jaw clenched, tears welling in his bloodshot eyes. "Then we're finished." She swallowed the iron-tasting bile rising in her throat. "We always were. We just didn't know it." The helicopter lurched suddenly, the engines screaming as the pilot banked sharply away from a towering black shape rising from the coastal cliffs. Carla's heart seized painfully as she glimpsed it through the swirling snow. A serpentine creature nearly 50 meters tall, its eyeless head splitting open into 6 radial jaws lined with concentric rings of jagged bone. Steam poured from its mouth as it shrieked, the sound vibrating through the helicopter's frame so violently Carla felt her teeth loosen in her gums. "Contact," the co-pilot screamed over comms. "We're taking evasive." The creature lunged upward, its massive jaws snapping shut around the helicopter's rear rotor. Metal shrieked and tore like foil. The Chinook spun violently, the cabin filled with screaming soldiers and medics as gear and bodies slammed against the walls. Carla felt herself lifted weightlessly as the helicopter pitched nose down toward the ocean. The sound of tearing metal and roaring wind drowned out the human screams around her. Time slowed to an agonizing crawl as her mind filled with a single, final certainty: this is how the world ends. The ocean rose up to meet them, dark and endless. Carla awoke to a suffocating blackness. Cold water pressed against her face, filling her mouth and nose with salt burn. She thrashed violently, kicking upward until her head broke the surface. She gasped, choking and coughing, her limbs convulsing with shock. Around her, wreckage floated on churning waves. Burning fuel streaked the ocean with curling orange flames. Broken bodies bobbed between twisted rotor blades and shattered fuselage panels. The helicopter's cockpit protruded from the water at a sharp angle, smoke and sparks pouring from ruptured electrical panels. "Help!" a voice screamed. Carla turned, her teeth chattering so violently she tasted blood. A young medic clung desperately to a floating ammo case, her face pale and streaked with tears. Behind her, something moved beneath the surface, a massive shadow gliding silently through the black water. Carla tried to swim to her, but her limbs were heavy, numb with cold and exhaustion. She watched helplessly as the medic screamed again. The water erupted in a massive black plume, and a serpentine shape burst upward, wrapping around her body and dragging her down into the depths with a single violent lurch. Carla sobbed, hot tears freezing against her cheeks. She kicked weakly, pulling herself onto a floating fuselage panel. The ocean heaved beneath her as the creature's massive shadow circled lazily below, stirring phosphorescent plankton into swirling green eddies. She lay there under the bruised twilight sky, the wind howling across endless water. In the distance, black shapes slithered across the coastal cliffs toward the inland mountains, their shadows merging with gathering storm clouds that churned across the horizon. The whispers filled her mind again, soothing now, almost gentle: "Sleep, warmth. Sleep forever. We will drink your dreams. We will drink your blood. You are ours." Carla closed her eyes as the cold gnawed deeper into her bones, each breath shallower than the last. She felt herself sinking inward, down through memory and thought and pain. The last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her completely was the distant moaning of the glacier carried on the screaming wind, its ancient song of awakening echoing across a world that would soon be silent. Darkness pressed down across Alaska like a closing fist. The few remaining communication satellites that passed overhead relayed flickering images of burning towns, twisted forests stripped of snow by serpent bodies dragging across them, and coastline highways clogged with thousands of abandoned cars dusted in drifting ash and black slush. In a bunker beneath Fort Greely, the last coordinated resistance huddled around flickering monitors. Generators rumbled in the concrete corridors, their fuel stores dwindling by the hour. The air reeked of sweat, diesel, and despair. Carla lay strapped to a medical cot, her body wrapped in thermal blankets. Tubes snaked from her arms to an IV drip that had nearly run dry. Her skin was yellowed with frostbite necrosis along her fingertips and ears. Her hair had fallen out in patches, revealing bruised and swollen scalp tissue from rapid rewarming. But her eyes, sunken and ringed with black hollows, remained open, unblinking, watching the ceiling with dead clarity. She was awake again. Lieutenant Sorrow sat beside her, his arm in a makeshift sling, a line of stitched gashes running down his cheek. His uniform hung loose from rapid weight loss, his lips cracked and pale. Outside, the base shook periodically as the glacier's moaning rumbled across the land, vibrating through permafrost, rebar, and bone alike. Each tremor dusted concrete flakes from the bunker ceiling onto the flickering monitors and silent keyboards below. A general's voice crackled over the radio, evacuating the last personnel from Kodiak Island now. No air corridors remained safe west of the Rockies. Coast Guard cutters reported contact with submerged serpentine shapes east of Vancouver. Homeland Command estimates North American infrastructure collapse within 72 hours. A long silence followed before another voice, broken with grief, whispered into the channel, "God forgive us. We woke them up." Carla's dry, cracked lips parted as she rasped softly, her voice barely audible over the bunker generators. They were always awake, just dreaming. Sorrow leaned closer, eyes glistening with tears. "Carla, is there anywhere they won't reach?" She turned her head toward him with agonizing slowness. Her irises were pale now, faded almost to gray, as if something had been drained from them beneath the ice. "Warmth draws them. Life draws them. They are the first darkness, Sorrow. The darkness before stars. Before the warmth of suns." His breath hitched painfully in his chest. "Then it's over." She stared past him, eyes unfocused, seeing something far beyond the bunker walls. "Not yet. But it will be." Above them, the Fort Greely perimeter erupted in gunfire as remaining infantry battalions poured everything they had into the advancing tide. White phosphorus shells streaked into the storm-dark sky, illuminating serpentine bodies rearing above the tree line, their eyeless heads splitting open into radial jaws lined with concentric rows of jagged bone. Smaller forms scuttled between armored vehicles, leaping onto their hulls with a metallic clang, tearing through plating with thin clawed limbs. One private screamed as a pale spider-like creature latched onto his chest, its mouth opening in a puckered ring that dissolved his uniform and flesh in steaming black slurry within seconds. His scream cut off abruptly as it burrowed between his ribs, vanishing inside him with a final twitch. The base commander stood on the communications tower, staring through snow-lashed binoculars at the distant Alaska range. Between flurries, he glimpsed shapes moving down the glacier slopes, hundreds of them, writhing and crawling, silhouetted against lightning flashes. The glacier's moaning rumbled across the plains like an earthquake, vibrating his teeth in his jaw. He pressed his radio to his mouth. "All units, this is Fort Greely Command. Fall back to Phase 2 retreat lines. Evac South begins now. Repeat, Evac South begins now." Inside the bunker, medics worked frantically to stabilize wounded soldiers as evacuation alarms blared overhead. Carla struggled to sit up, her mind flickering in and out like a failing radio signal. Sorrow braced her under the arms, lifting her onto trembling feet. "Come on. We're getting you out. There's a convoy leaving for the Yukon border in 15. She stumbled alongside him down the flickering hallway. Soldiers ran past, some carrying rifles, others dragging wounded comrades. Sirens wailed as concrete trembled with approaching footfalls from above. They emerged into the blizzard-dark courtyard, floodlights casting swirling cones through the driving snow. Armored trucks idled in long columns, their exhaust curling into the frigid air. Civilians huddled among them, bundled in mismatched coats and blankets, their eyes wide with silent, shell-shocked terror. Carla heard it then. Above the sirens, beyond the wind. A low, resonant moan that vibrated her bones. The glacier's voice, rolling across hundreds of miles, as if the continent itself were cracking open. From the forest, thin shadows emerged, drifting between spruce trunks with liquid grace. Their eyeless heads tilted toward the convoy, mouths opening in silent screams. Then the serpent rose. It burst from the tree line in a spray of pulverized snow and shattered spruce, its massive body coiling upward into the storm-dark sky. Its radial jaws yawned open as it shrieked, the sound a deafening chord of agony and hunger that threw people to their knees, clutching their ears, blood streaming from ruptured drums. Machine guns opened fire, tracer rounds stitching glowing lines into its translucent flesh. Black ichor sprayed in steaming arcs, but the creature did not slow. Its mouth closed around an armored truck, crushing steel and bodies with a wet metallic crunch. Carla fell to the snow, clutching her head as the whispers roared through her skull. No more dreams. No more warmth. Only us. Only forever. She felt sorrow grab her under the arms, dragging her toward the last truck in the convoy. A soldier screamed nearby, his body lifted into the air by thin black tendrils that dissolved his flesh mid-air, raining steaming red droplets onto the snow. The truck roared forward, tires spinning against blood-slicked gravel. Sorrow threw Carla inside, diving in after her as the driver floored the accelerator. They skidded out of the base, bouncing down the dark highway south, past flickering street lamps and abandoned tanks half buried in drifting snow. Carla pressed her face to the frosted window. Behind them, Fort Greely burned. The serpent reared above the collapsing barracks, roaring its triumph into the storm-racked sky. In the distance, other shadows moved, across mountain passes, down frozen rivers, through coastal fishing towns now silent and dark. Shapes slithered beneath the sea ice toward Kodiak and the Aleutians. Black steam fissures cracked open along tundra plains, releasing smaller, spider-like forms that scurried across the snow in endless tides. The convoy drove south into the endless darkness, headlights cutting weak beams through the blizzard. Sorrow clutched Carla's trembling hand, his grip cold and desperate. "Where do we go now?" he whispered. She turned to him with empty eyes, her cracked lips curling faintly into something between a smile and a grimace. "South. As far south as the warmth goes." Outside, the glacier moaned again, the sound rolling down the continent like the voice of a dying god. The convoy thundered south along the Alaska highway, engines roaring into the dawnless storm. Snow whipped sideways across the frozen asphalt in blinding white veils, rattling the armored trucks and Humvees. Their headlights cut thin tunnels through the swirling darkness, illuminating skeletal spruce trees half buried under fresh drifts. Carla sat wedged between Sorrow and a young soldier whose face was pale and blank with shock. His rifle lay across his lap, muzzle pointed at the floor, his trembling fingers tracing the black polymer stock over and over in a silent, compulsive rhythm. Outside the reinforced window, the world passed in flashes of gray and black. Abandoned gas stations with shattered windows. Burned-out school buses half buried in snow. Roadside motels with dark, empty windows staring blindly into the blizzard. The radio crackled constantly with fragmented transmissions, Kodiak base gone dark. Last contact reported mass breaches along, Portage evacuated. Anchorage refugee columns lost along the Seward Highway, Homer breached. Kenai breached. All units fall back to Yukon border fallback lines, each voice carried the same undertone, brittle with terror, underpinned by the certainty of irreversible loss. Sorrow wiped his chapped lips with a shaking hand. "How far south do we need to go?" he whispered, his voice almost lost in the rumble of tires against ice. Carla turned to him, her frostbitten face expressionless. "Farther than roads can take us." He blinked slowly, hollow-eyed. "What do you mean?" She closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cold metal wall. "The warmth calls to them. It always did. The farther south we run, the closer we bring them to the rest of the world." The young soldier beside them let out a ragged sob, pressing his trembling hand over his mouth. Outside, the darkness deepened despite the hour. The sun no longer rose above the storm clouds. The wind carried faint echoes of that ancient moaning, rolling down from the shattered glaciers like the chorus of a dying world. The convoy stopped at a collapsed bridge 20 miles north of the Yukon border. Snow drifted waist-high against the crumpled guardrails. Beyond the twisted steel beams, the frozen river below churned with black shapes sliding beneath the ice, serpentine shadows moving with impossible speed. Commanders gathered in the howling wind, their words whipped away by the storm. Some gestured south, others north, their faces gray with exhaustion and frostbite. Finally, a decision was made: the convoy would detour east along a maintenance road toward Dawson City, then south into British Columbia. Carla watched silently as families were roused from cramped back seats and guided through the snow to reboard armored troop carriers. Children whimpered against their mothers' coats, their tears freezing into pale crystals on flushed cheeks. A medic approached Carla, her eyes rimmed red with windburn and grief. She checked Carla's frostbitten hands and ears, her latex gloves sticking briefly to torn skin. "She shouldn't be moved," she said to Sorrow. "She needs oxygen, warm saline drips, thermal rewarming." Sorrow shook his head bleakly. "There's nowhere to treat her. We keep moving or we die here." The medic swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "We'll all die anyway." No one disagreed. By dusk, though dusk was indistinguishable from dawn in the perpetual storm, the convoy rolled down an old maintenance road. The snow thinned slightly, revealing mossy asphalt streaked with frozen streams. Black spruce trunks loomed on either side like gaunt, skeletal sentinels. Ahead, Dawson City smoldered under curling black smoke. Flames flickered through shattered windows. Shapes moved along Main Street. Thin, pale forms dragging limp bodies into alleys, their eyeless heads tilted skyward, tasting the rising heat of burning timber and flesh. The convoy stopped at the outskirts. Soldiers dismounted silently, rifles held slack against their chests. No orders were given to advance. There was nothing left to save. Carla stepped down into the snow, her boots sinking ankle-deep into ash and drift. The smell hit her instantly, a cloying mix of burned wood, diesel, and roasted human flesh. Her stomach convulsed painfully, but she had nothing left to vomit. Sorrow stood beside her, silent tears tracking down his soot-streaked face. "We're out of time," he whispered. Carla nodded numbly. We were out of time before we even knew it. A scream split the twilight. Down the street, a woman ran from a collapsed storefront, her hair flaming, her arms clawing at the air as she shrieked. Behind her, a thin, skeletal creature loped forward, its translucent flesh rippling like jellyfish membrane. It leapt onto her back, wrapping spindly limbs around her torso, its eyeless face pressing against the back of her skull as its circular mouth opened wide. Carla turned away as the scream cut off abruptly. Around them, soldiers sobbed openly into gloved hands. One dropped to his knees in the snow, pressing his rifle barrel under his chin. Another stared up at the swirling sky, whispering prayers that merged with the glacier's distant moaning. That night, the convoy set up a temporary perimeter in a burned-out elementary school. Soldiers stacked desks against windows and wired trip flares along the chain-link fence. The wind carried distant gunfire and the echoes of inhuman howls drifting from the town's smoldering core. Carla lay curled in a nest of thermal blankets under the teacher's desk. Her frost-bitten fingers pulsed with agonizing heat as circulation returned in bursts of fire and ice. She stared at the cracked ceiling tiles above her, tracing shapes in the black mold stains, serpents, spider limbs, eyeless skulls whispering her name. Sorrow sat beside her, his head bowed, rifle cradled in his lap. "Command says Seattle's being evacuated," he rasped. "Portland too. Reports of breaches along the BC coast. They're moving south, across the entire continent." Carla blinked slowly. "They're following warmth. Humanity is warmth." He turned to her, tears brimming in his red-rimmed eyes. "What do we do?" She closed her eyes as tears slipped down her temples into her hair. "There's nothing to do. This is what waking them means." Outside, the wind rose to a shrieking howl. The glacier's moan rolled through the forests, rattling windowpanes and shaking icicles from eaves. Shadows moved between the school buses parked along the chain-link fence, drifting through drifting snow like drifting ghosts. And in the blackness beyond the northern horizon, the hungry whispered to each other in voices older than light, "We smell them. We hear them. We will drink them all." Morning never came. The storm clouds churned endlessly over the burned-out elementary school, casting the world in perpetual twilight. The wind howled down the Yukon Valley, carrying with it the glacier's low, mournful moan, a sound so vast and resonant that it seemed to pulse through the marrow of every living thing. Inside the barricaded classroom, soldiers huddled in silent despair, their rifles slack in numb hands. Some stared at the peeling murals of cartoon wolves and snowshoe hares dancing on winter hillsides, their eyes vacant. Others sat slumped against overturned desks, staring at nothing. Carla lay curled under her thermal blankets, her frostbitten flesh tingling with slow, painful rewarming. Every nerve burned as if dipped in acid, but her mind registered none of it. Her thoughts moved like sluggish black oil, heavy with whispers that filled the spaces behind her eyes. "We see you. We hear you. We taste your dreams." Beside her, Sorrow leaned against the boarded window, his injured arm wrapped tight against his chest. His gaunt face was turned toward the frosted glass, watching shadows drift between burned-out school buses in the courtyard beyond. A voice crackled softly over his radio. "Command. Breach confirmed at Juneau. Sitka gone dark. Vancouver reporting mass incursions from ocean fissures and coastal glacial flows. Repeat, multiple breaches across the BC coast." The voice paused, trembling. "Washington State on full evacuation. Cascadia fault warning has been rescinded, focus shifting to hostile non-human life forms. God help us all." Sorrow clicked off the radio. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind screaming around the building's eaves. He closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his hollow cheek. Carla stirred under her blankets, her lips cracked and bleeding. "They're following the melt," she rasped. "Everywhere the glaciers break. Everywhere permafrost releases them." He turned to her slowly, his eyes empty. "Why now? Why didn't they rise before humanity came north?" She closed her eyes, the whispers curling through her mind in cold tendrils. "They were trapped in the ice long before we ever saw them. The cold kept them dormant. The warmth wakes them up. We burned the world to fuel our lives, and now the melt frees what should have stayed buried." A flicker of anger flashed through his grief. "Then this is our fault?" She nodded faintly. "They waited. That was their purpose. Waiting for warmth." Sorrow clenched his jaw. "Purpose? They're animals. Predators." But Carla shook her head, tears pooling in her ears. "No. They're not animals. They're older." She turned her vacant eyes to the cracked ceiling tiles, her voice dropping to a ragged whisper as the words poured from her like black water. "Before the first microbes crawled through primordial seas, before the sun formed, they drifted in darkness. They were the darkness. The first void-born life. The universe froze them in ice on the edge of this world. Trapped. Dreaming forever. Until we burned away their prison." Sarah's breathing quickened. "You're saying they're not from here?" She sobbed softly. "They are here. They've always been here. But they're not of here. They don't think like we do. We're just warmth to them. Light. Noise. Food." He staggered back, his uninjured hand gripping his hair. "How do you know this, Carla? How do you know what they are?" Her voice trembled, breaking under the weight of revelation. "Because they told me." The room fell silent except for the rattle of wind against boarded windows. Soldiers shifted uneasily, glancing at each other with wide, terrified eyes. A young private began whispering Hail Marys under his breath, his gloved fingers clenched so tightly around his rosary beads that they cracked. That night, the perimeter alarms tripped. Trip flares burst in brief orange flashes, illuminating thin shapes drifting through the chain-link fences like shadows detached from any living body. Gunfire erupted in ragged, hopeless bursts. Screams rose above the wind, echoing down the darkened hallways lined with tattered student artwork. In the classroom, soldiers scrambled to firing positions behind overturned desks, their rifles shaking in white-knuckled hands. Carla sat upright under her blankets, her frostbitten lips moving silently, chanting words that were not hers. Words the glacier had whispered into her blood. Words that felt like ice shards shredding her mind. "We drink the warmth. We drink the light. We were here before both." Sorrow grabbed her shoulders, shaking her violently. "Carla! Stay with me. Stay with me." But she only turned to him, her eyes glazed and shimmering with unnatural reflections of moving shapes that were not in the room. "Do you hear them, Sorrow?" she whispered. "They're singing." The window beside them exploded inward in a spray of frosted glass shards. A thin, skeletal limb shot through, claws raking across a soldier's throat in a single fluid motion. Blood sprayed the walls in a pulsing arc as the creature slipped inside, its translucent body rippling with shifting organs and pulsing black veins. It turned its eyeless head toward Sorrow and Carla, its mouth opening in a perfect, silent circle lined with needle-like teeth. Steam curled from its gullet as it tasted their warmth. Sorrow raised his rifle and fired 3 shots point-blank into its chest. Black ichor sprayed across the murals of cartoon wolves and dancing hares. The creature staggered, its limbs twitching spastically, before collapsing into a writhing heap on the linoleum floor. But behind it, dozens more shadows drifted through the shattered windows. The moaning rose, vibrating the walls, rattling ceiling tiles to the floor in choking clouds of dust and mold spores. Carla sobbed softly, rocking back and forth as the whispers filled her skull. No warmth escapes. No light remains. All is ours. As it was before. Sorrow screamed in rage and despair, firing until his rifle clicked empty. Then he drew his sidearm, unloading the magazine into the advancing tide of eyeless forms. Soldiers fell screaming around him, torn apart by clawed limbs or dissolved mid-scream by pulsing, lamprey-like mouths that latched onto faces and throats. He turned to Carla, tears streaming down his soot-streaked cheeks. "Run!" But she didn't move. She only stared at him with empty, hopeless eyes. There's nowhere to run. The glacier's moan rolled over the town, shaking window frames from their sills and toppling rusted swing sets into drifting snow. The last command broadcasts crackled into static as a chorus of overlapping voices drowned out the airwaves. The warmth is ours. The world is ours. The darkness returns. Sorrow pressed his sidearm to his temple. Tears blurred his vision as the first creature lunged toward him, mouth yawning wide. He pulled the trigger. Carla closed her eyes as the warmth of his blood splattered across her face, steaming faintly in the freezing air. She curled onto her side, her mind slipping under the black tide of their song. The last thing she felt was thin, cold limbs wrapping around her body, lifting her weightlessly into a darkness so complete it devoured thought itself. Outside, the storm howled across the Yukon Valley. Shadows drifted south through drifting snow, following roads and rivers, spreading across the continent like the advance of an ancient, eternal night. And above it all, the glacier moaned in triumph, its voice rolling across mountains and oceans, echoing through a dying world it would soon reclaim as its own. Carla drifted in darkness. She felt nothing. No cold. No pain. No weight of her frostbitten flesh. Around her spread an endless black sea, silent but for the soft whispering that echoed through it, a language older than stars, vibrating through her bones and thought alike. We drink. We dream. We awaken. Visions flickered across her mind like static, images she knew were not hers. Vast oceans of methane slush beneath alien skies. Black icebergs drifting through starlight, each carrying within them sleeping shapes curled like ancient embryos. The galaxy spinning around them, bright with the warmth they craved but could never reach. They were not born of Earth. They were seated here, locked in frozen prisons when the solar system was still young, before continents rose from the sea. Before microbial life crawled into brine pools. Before warmth woke anything. They waited then, as they waited now. Waiting was their only true state. We are patience. We are hunger. We are the darkness between suns. She woke to screams. Her eyes flickered open to a fractured dawn, the first sun she had seen in days, its pale disk smeared across a violet sky choked with drifting black ash. Around her lay the ruins of the elementary school. The roof had collapsed inward under the glacier's tremors, burying classrooms in splintered beams and insulation. Snow drifted through shattered windows, coating desks and bloodied bodies in silent white burial shrouds. Carla lay half buried under fallen drywall, her frozen fingers curled weakly against her chest. She tasted blood and ash on her cracked lips. The whispers throbbed through her mind with each slow heartbeat, as constant as breath. She turned her head painfully. Outside, down the school's front steps, the creatures moved between burned-out trucks and armored carriers, their thin limbs trailing black ichor across the ice-rutted pavement. Some carried limp bodies over their shoulders. Others scuttled across the snow, their lamprey mouths latching onto the dead and dying, pulsing rhythmically as they drank. But farther beyond them, down the slope toward the Yukon River, something vast moved. A serpentine creature coiled through the drifting fog, hundreds of meters long, its eyeless head rising into the dawn like the twisted tower of some alien cathedral. Its radial jaws opened in a silent scream, steam pouring from its throat in coiling black columns that twisted into the sky. All around it, smaller creatures clustered, spidery forms, skeletal bipeds, eel-like shadows that slithered through the drifts. They knelt before the serpent's massive bulk, heads bowed in silent worship. Carla understood then. They were not an army. They were a colony. A mind. An organism spread across millions of bodies, all serving a single purpose. And above them, the glacier itself was not merely ice. It was their nest. Their egg. Their prison and their throne. She heard their voice again, echoing inside her skull, "We are the hungry. We are the dark. Your warmth birthed life on this world. We will drink it, and the world will return to stillness." She sobbed weakly, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Why here, why Earth? Their whisper curled around her mind like ice crystals growing in frozen lungs. Not Earth. Any warmth. Any sun. Any world. We drift between stars until gravity binds us. Until warmth wakes us. Then we drink. Until the warmth is gone. Movement caught her eye to the west. Along the snowy ridgeline, a ragged column of refugees trudged down the highway, dozens of dark shapes bundled against the biting wind. They moved in silence, children clinging to mothers' coats, men dragging sleds piled with salvaged food and blankets. Some rode snowmobiles or battered ATVs, engines growling feebly against the vast hush. They had no destination, only away. Away from the glaciers. Away from the moaning darkness. South, always south, following a dying sun across a dying world. The serpent lifted its massive head toward them. Its eyeless face split open into 6 radial jaws lined with spiraling teeth. Steam erupted from its throat as it screamed, a sound that rolled across the valley like an avalanche, shaking trees from their roots and sending the refugees sprawling onto the ice. Then it began to move. Its immense bulk coiled down the slope, crushing spruce trees beneath its weight, each scale-line segment trailing writhing smaller forms that clung to its flanks like parasites. Carla pressed her hands to her ears as the scream reached her, blood dripping from her nose in thin red ribbons across the snow. The world blurred into silent gray as darkness flickered at the edges of her vision. She woke again, she didn't know how long later. Hours. Minutes. Days. The sun had risen slightly, casting a pale, greasy light across the drifting snow. The refugee column was gone. Only scattered clothing and overturned sleds remained, half buried in churned red drifts. Black trails streaked the snow where bodies had been dragged away. The serpent was gone too, but its whisper lingered in her mind, "We drink warmth. We drink light. When this world is gone, we drift again." A flicker of memory burned in her fractured thoughts. The journal. The ranger's words, "The heart is alive. It dreams. We are nothing but warmth to it." Was there a way to freeze them again? Rebind them in darkness until the stars themselves went cold? Even thinking it felt foolish, like a moth imagining it could smother a bonfire with its wings. Yet the thought sparked something deep in her chest. A sliver of defiance. Maya's sacrifice can't be meaningless. Jake's death can't be meaningless. If there is a way. She dragged herself upright, screaming with pain as frost-cracked skin split along her back and thighs. She stumbled toward the broken window, leaning against the sill, staring at the ashen sky. The whispers roared with quiet laughter, feeling her resolve. You are nothing. You are warmth. You are food. She clenched her teeth until blood filled her mouth. No, she rasped. I am human. She pulled herself through the window onto the snow-choked walkway. Her frostbitten legs buckled instantly, dropping her into the drift. The cold gnawed deep into her marrow, but she forced her limbs to move, crawling forward, dragging herself over torn bodies and black slick snow. Above her, the glacier moaned again, its voice rising into a triumphant, endless howl that rolled south across the continent, echoing over the dying cities of Vancouver, Seattle, Portland. Humanity's last flickering strongholds felt it in their bones, their dreams, their faltering breaths. The world shivered under its final purpose: drink. Sleep. Drift. Repeat. Carla crawled toward the ridgeline, leaving a thin crimson trail behind her. She would find a way. Even if it meant dying alone in the black belly of the hungry. Carla crawled across the ice-choked ridgeline, every movement sending white-hot agony knifing through her frostbitten limbs. Her vision blurred and doubled, but she forced her eyes to remain open, blinking away blood and tears as she moved inch by inch toward the glacier's broken maw below. The valley spread beneath her like an open wound, torn by fissures and steaming cracks that pulsed with sickly green luminescence. Thin shadows drifted between jagged ice spires, their translucent bodies flickering in and out of view like dying candle flames. The great serpent coiled along the valley floor, its bulk rippling with sluggish, dreaming movements. Smaller creatures crawled over its scales, tending to seeping wounds left by artillery fire, their lamprey mouths sucking away necrotic black ichor with rhythmic pulses. Above it all loomed the glacier's exposed heart. A towering column of black ice fractured by recent collapse, glowing faintly from within with shifting, writhing shadows. The air around it shimmered with cold so intense it blurred reality, warping snowflakes into spiraling fractal patterns as they fell. Carla felt the whispers coiling through her skull, pulsing with each heartbeat. You return to us. You bring your warmth. You bring your final dream. She spat blood into the snow, her cracked lips curling into a grimace of defiance. I bring you nothing but death. She dragged herself to her feet, swaying unsteadily against the biting wind. Her knees buckled once before locking into place with agonizing stiffness. She stumbled down the slope toward the glacier's heart, slipping on blackened ice slick with frozen blood. Each step closer intensified the whispers. They became a choir of voices, male, female, childlike, alien, overlapping in a seamless chorus of hunger. Warmth. Light. Fear. Memory. All are the same to us. All are food. She reached the base of the glacier's heart after what felt like hours. Up close, the black ice column rose into the storm-dark sky like a twisted tower, its surface rippling with frozen bodies trapped in translucent agony. She saw Ben's face near the base, his eyes wide and sightless, mouth frozen in a silent scream. Higher up, she saw Maya, her hands pressed against the ice from within, her face serene, as if asleep. Carla pressed her palm against the ice, sobbing weakly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Maya's frozen lips parted slightly, and the whispers rose through Carla's mind with suffocating clarity, do not mourn me. Finish what we began. Carla fell to her knees, clutching her head as the chorus rose to deafening intensity. Images flooded her vision, memories not hers. Worlds frozen in eternal darkness. Stars blinking out as serpentine shadows coiled across their light. Planet after planet, drifting empty and silent in the void, stripped of warmth and life, left behind as the hungry drifted onward through the cold between suns. We are the end. We are the silence after the last light. Carla screamed into the storm, her voice raw and torn. Then die with us. She fumbled at her belt, fingers numb and clumsy, until she pulled free the last weapon she carried, a block of C4 she'd scavenged from a dead soldier's satchel at the school. She pressed it against the base of the glacier's heart, jamming the detonator into place with trembling hands. The whispers rippled with quiet amusement. Small warmth. Small fire. We have endured suns. What is your spark to us? She pressed her forehead against the ice, tears freezing instantly against its surface. It's not about killing you, she whispered. It's about burying you again. She armed the detonator, feeling the switch click under her thumb. Warmth. She closed her eyes, thinking of Jake's smile. Of Maya's whispered prayers. Of her mother humming in the kitchen as winter wind rattled the windows of their childhood home. Of all the warmth that made humanity beautiful. Goodbye. She pressed the switch. The explosion ripped through the glacier's heart with a deafening, concussive roar. The black ice column shattered into 1,000 jagged fragments, each piece reflecting twisted shadows as it fell. The shockwave rolled up through the glacier, fracturing fissures into bottomless chasms. The valley floor collapsed as ice caves imploded, sending geysers of steaming black water and pulverized stone hundreds of meters into the storm-dark sky. The great serpent reared back, its radial jaws opening in a silent scream of agony. Its body convulsed violently as fractures raced along its massive coils. Smaller creatures writhed in synchrony, their translucent bodies bubbling and bursting as the psychic chorus of the hungry collapsed into discordant howls. Carla was thrown backward by the blast, her body skidding across the shattered ice until she slammed into an exposed rock ledge. Pain exploded through her ribs, her vision darkening at the edges. She gasped raggedly, forcing her eyes open as the glacier's heart crumbled into itself. The whispers flickered in and out of her mind, each one weaker than the last. No, no warmth, darkness again, sleep, dream. She smiled faintly through cracked, bloody lips. Sleep forever, she whispered. Dream alone. Above her, the glacier shuddered and split. Entire ridges collapsed inward, burying the heart beneath millions of tons of fractured ice and rock. The serpentine body of the great creature twisted violently one last time before freezing mid-motion, its flesh hardening into black crystal as the life within it guttered and died. Silence fell across the valley. For the first time in weeks, the wind carried no moaning, no whispers, no screams. Only the sound of drifting snowflakes landing gently across the fractured battlefield, muffling the world in a final, blessed quiet. Carla lay broken against the rocks, her breath rattling weakly in her chest. The sky above her cracked with faint dawn light, streaks of lavender and pale gold bleeding through thinning storm clouds. She blinked slowly, her eyes glazed with frozen tears. The cold no longer burned her flesh. It was soft now, gentle, wrapping her in a numb embrace. Her thoughts drifted out into the quiet dawn, untethered at last from the suffocating chorus of the hungry. She saw Maya's face in her mind, peaceful and smiling. Jake's strong arms lifting her through the darkness. Her mother's humming voice. Warmth. Light. Love. She exhaled a final breath into the quiet dawn. It curled in the freezing air above her, a thin white wisp, before fading into the silence of a world left forever changed. Far above, along the distant southern horizon, the first rays of sun broke through the thinning clouds, illuminating the shattered glacier. Its fractured surface glittered with trapped black shards, each one pulsing faintly with sleeping shadows. The world would thaw again. It always did. And somewhere deep beneath the ice, the hungry would dream again. But for now, silence reigned. And the warmth of humanity burned on, fragile, flickering, but unextinguished. Snow fell softly across the valley, silent and unbroken. The storm clouds had finally thinned, revealing the pale blue expanse of an early Arctic morning. Sunlight caught on fractured ridges of ice and stone, turning the shattered landscape into a field of white fire. Carla lay at the base of the collapsed glacier, her body half buried in fresh snow. She no longer felt the cold. Her frostbitten skin had turned waxen and pale, her lips tinged with faint blue. Her eyes stared upward into the dawning sky, wide and unblinking, reflecting the scattered gold light of the sun's first rise in weeks. She did not move. Did not breathe. But somewhere deep within the fractured labyrinth of her mind, she drifted. She was walking through a sunlit forest. Birch trunks glowed silver against dark mossy soil. Soft golden light filtered through trembling leaves overhead. The air smelled of wet earth and distant pine resin. A creek burbled nearby, its water clear and cold, singing as it flowed across polished stones. Ahead stood Maya, barefoot on the moss, her long black hair lifting gently in a breeze that never touched Carla's skin. She wore a simple white dress, clean and unstained. Her eyes were bright with quiet warmth. "Maya," Carla whispered, her voice trembling. Am I dead?" Maya smiled gently. "No. Not yet. But you're close." Tears blurred Carla's vision as she stumbled forward, falling into Maya's arms. The warmth of that embrace burned through her frozen bones like the sun's kiss on winter glass. "I tried," she sobbed. "I tried to stop them. I tried to bury them again." "I know," Maya whispered against her hair. "You did everything you could." They stood together in silence as the forest rustled softly around them. Somewhere beyond the trees, a raven called once, its voice deep and ancient, echoing through the quiet dawn. Far above them, in the world of ice and blood, the last remaining National Guard reconnaissance drone circled over the collapsed glacier. Its camera streamed flickering footage to a command post hastily established in Whitehorse, Yukon. On the monitor, officers and scientists watched in silence as the drone swept across the devastation. Fractured ice ridges collapsing into bottomless fissures, the great serpent's corpse frozen mid-motion, its flesh crystallized into black glass, half buried under rubble. Steam rose from scattered fissures, curling into the pale dawn sky. A geologist spoke quietly, his voice hoarse with dread. "Seismic readings show the glacier's core collapsed inward. Temperature anomalies dropping. It looks like they're dormant again." A general exhaled shakily. "God forgive us. How long before they wake again?" The geologist shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "Depends how long it takes for the ice to melt again. Years. Decades. But next time, there will be no warning." The general turned to the monitor, watching the drone circle above Carla's unmoving body. "Recover her," he said softly. "Bring her home." In Carla's drifting dream, Maya pulled back and cupped her face gently in warm palms. "They're not gone," she whispered. "Just sleeping." "I know," Carla replied, tears sliding down her cheeks. They'll always wake again. Yes. Maya's eyes filled with sorrow. Because that is their purpose. Darkness feeds on warmth until warmth is gone. Then what do we do? Carla asked brokenly. If we can't kill them, what do we do? Maya smiled faintly. We keep the warmth burning as long as we can. We love. We live. We hope. That's what makes us human. She woke to bright lights glaring against a sterile ceiling. The air smelled of antiseptic, stale sweat, and melted ice. Machines beeped quietly around her. Tubes snaked from her arms to hanging saline bags. Her breath fogged in the cold air, each inhalation raw against frost-burned lungs. A nurse leaned over her, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks. She's awake. She's awake. Lieutenant Sorrow limped into view, his arm in a fresh sling, eyes red-rimmed and sunken with exhaustion. He reached out, gripping her trembling hand in his calloused fingers. You did it, he rasped, his voice cracking. You bought us time. She turned her head weakly, staring at the flickering fluorescent light overhead. Her voice emerged as a dry, broken whisper. They're not gone. Sorrow closed his eyes, tears spilling down his cheeks. I know. Silence filled the small field hospital as distant helicopters rumbled overhead, ferrying survivors south toward warming plains and burning cities. A quiet hopelessness settled in the corners of the room like drifting snow. Finally, Carla spoke again, her voice so faint he had to lean close to hear. Tell them to remember the cold. To respect it. To fear what sleeps in it. I will, Sorrow whispered. I promise. She closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as sleep dragged her back down into silence. Far to the north, beyond crumpled glaciers and dead valleys, beneath mountains carved by eons of ice, the last sleeping fragments of the hungry pulsed faintly in darkness. The warmth of the world flickered through their dreams like distant candlelight. We drink. We sleep. We drift. We wake. Their chorus whispered silently beneath the deepening cold, promising only one truth, they would wake again. Because that was the final purpose of all warmth. To be consumed by the dark. Forever.